Chapter 40. The Blissful One. Floating in his vision made Dake realize that his feeling was not wrong. This flower card could indeed absorb people's thoughts through the transmission of magic. The so-called divination was just the person you are thinking of extracted from the surface of your thoughts. By giving the flower card the concept of love divination, it led people to naturally think of the person they were thinking of when they used it, and then that person would be shown on the card. Even the following phrase, the person you love, was only what you thought of it. It was just a small trick like that. Because it was not harmful, it would not arouse people's vigilance. On the surface, it was just a very interesting little toy. But now it seemed that it was not as simple as it looked. Dake used the magic pen to test again and confirmed that the flower card of the black rose was indeed damaged. He took out his notebook and began to record. He remembered the website. Vipkanshu. 6.1. The flower card could absorb people's thoughts through the transmission of magic. 2. There must be people who accidentally injected too much magic, but so far there was no feedback, indicating that the flower card only had a special reaction to the magic of a few people. I am the only one here for now. 3. The flower card could absorb great sins, indicating that its origin sequence was extremely high. 4. The person who could make this flower card must have a high level of skill. 5. Want. No matter who made this flower card for whatever purpose. In fact, its ability to absorb blissful would not change. If he could collect enough flower cards, he could boldly try to raise blissful to more than 100 to make the blissful series of magic cards. His heart became restless. His greed was a little out of control. Dake calmed his mind, cleaned up the remains of the flower card, and put it in a sealed bag. At the same time, White and Luo Boat were practicing in the corridor of the castle. White's magic beast was a stag with the light attribute. When it raised its head, it was a full 2 meters tall with majestic antlers that were forked like branches. It had a much higher attack power than ordinary magic beasts. However, as an illusory beast, its magic power was still only 100. Card name, Magic Beast. Type, Sprite card. Level, Race, Bird Beast. Attribute, Light magic power, 100 attack, 200 defense, 100 ultimate skill, Light of the Soul. Dake's illusory beast, EV, had undergone a qualitative change in its core. White's magical beast, Stag, and Luo Boat's magical beast, Castle, were completely reflected on the surface. Their illusory beasts were different from the standard template. White wasn't blindly arrogant when he tried to win the class competition. But after practicing with Luo Boat for a while, White gradually realized that he was too naive. Luo Boat's castle was too hard. Even with the stag's 200 points of attack, he was unable to deal any damage to it. After repeated attempts to no avail, White said helplessly, "This is not fair, Luo Boat." Luo Boat, on the other hand, swept away the gloom from last night and laughed in high spirits. "No, this is reality, White. 300 greater than 200, even I can calculate it." White frowned, but I remember Professor Cheong-si once said that the surface data of a magic sprite card can only be used as a reference. In reality, there will be a lot of discrepancies. Luo Boat said proudly, "The discrepancies are that I'm harder than you think. Ha ha ha. I can't play anymore." White lamented, "Let's call it a night. I want to practice by myself." Then the two parted ways. Luo Boat strolled around outside and saw many first-year students practicing duels. But they were all small fights, so he smiled reservedly. After parting ways with Luo Boat, White took out the card decorated with red lilacs. He injected magic power, and that person's face appeared on the card again. White's expression was a bit absent-minded. The changes in the library made him realize that this card was unusual. But he didn't know how to deal with it. Should he tell the professor? Or should he explore it himself? If he told the professor, would his secret be exposed? He didn't come up with a solution. White took out into the abyss that he always carried with him. The moon was still very round tonight. Would it work? But as soon as he opened the book, and even before he walked out of the castle to bathe in the moonlight, the line of words began to twist, and a pink mist rose from the pages. But it didn't converge into the shape of a roue. Instead, it floated towards the lilac card in his hand. Startled, White subconsciously separated the two cards. However, the pink mist sped up and instantly drilled into the flower tile. Then the card immediately changed, and the lilacs on the card bloomed, releasing a strong floral fragrance. The figure of Panduola suddenly came to life. The senior who drilled half her body out of the card raised her soft and slender hands and combed her hair back, revealing her snow-white and delicate neck. White opened his eyes wide and looked at the Panduola, who was exactly the same as the real person. He was completely stunned. A few minutes later, White put into the abyss back into his bag, and only the card with the pink mist was left in his hand. He held the card in his palm, and from time to time lowered his head to look at the Panduola in the card and whispered, "Is it this way?" Panduola chuckled and nodded slightly. Her laughter was gentle and soft, like a clear spring flowing into his heart. White followed its guidance with a bit of infatuation. Soon, he arrived at the place where he had walked last night. He hurriedly walked past the statue of the Grand Magus, and then turned into another fork in the road. Panduola's guidance was even clearer than the mist. He entered the secret passage and quickened his pace. This time, he didn't take a fork in the road, and after 10 minutes, he arrived at a hall. This hall was hidden in the depths of the castle, and was about the size of a lecture hall. There were 2 stone pillars in the center, and the pillars were carved with images of dancing goddesses. At the very front, there was a tall altar. On top of the altar stood a statue of a goddess. As White walked in, the torches on both sides of the hall lit up automatically, illuminating every corner of the hall. White looked nervously at the statue. The statue was carved out of fine white jade, and the dust of history didn't leave many traces on it. It clasped its hands in front of its chest, closed its eyes, and nodded slightly, as if it was praying. The light of the fire shone on its body, but the reflection was as white as the bright moon. White suddenly realized that just looking at it made him feel like his mind was being sucked away. It was so sacred and beautiful. Footsteps suddenly sounded. Chapter 41. Who is it? White was very sharp. He almost instinctively went around the altar and hid behind the goddess statue. Then, the footsteps became more frequent. There was more than one person here. White suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of loss. So I'm not the only one here? That feeling was like a toy that had been licked by others after much difficulty. Moreover, it was licked by several people at the same time. He didn't dare to act rashly. He could only listen to the sounds and imagine what they were doing. There were at least 5 or 6 people in the temple. Their voices were very low, and he couldn't hear what they were saying. But in the end, they seemed to place something in front of the goddess statue and chanted an incantation that sounded like a chant. The atmosphere gradually became tense. Thankfully, Victor's willpower was strong enough. If it had been Robert, he would have screamed and screamed in fright. Remember this in 1 second. https://m. Vipkanchu. VIP. As the incantation reached a certain stage, the white light on the goddess statue seemed to flow, and the light became brighter and brighter. White tried to look up and found that some of the minor flaws on the statue were being carefully repaired. Are they just a group of tinkerers here to repair the goddess statue? This thought flashed through White's mind. He couldn't believe it himself. When the incantation ended, the atmosphere eased a little, and the group of tinkerers also spoke more freely. White could faintly hear what they were saying. "Burn them to death. For the goddess. We will succeed. This is the holy war." Sizzle. The bright moon disappeared, and the day was coming. The light of dawn shone on the earth, as if the path of righteousness was eternal. Dake opened the door and walked out of the bedroom. Something slid down the door and attracted his attention. He looked down and couldn't help but smile. But after last night's experience, he quickly pursed his lips and repeatedly chanted "Chu Shi Biao" a few times before bending down to pick up the flower tile on the ground. The pure white devil's snare is a soft flower of love. Those who see this flower will be cleansed of evil. Dake inserted a bit of magic into the flower tile. Little Ibu appeared on the tile and gave him the best morning greeting. Today was still a refreshing day. Before classes on magical beasts started, there was only one duel class on Friday. Even so, the duel class was held on Friday morning so that the duel class could be delayed as much as they wanted. Today's class was held by all 4 schools. The class was held at Battle Hall 2. It wasn't even 8 o'clock, and almost all of the first-year students were eager to try. They were looking forward to the first duel in their lives. Even if this so-called elite mode was just a watered-down version of the real duel, no one would care about this. As long as they could go on stage, as long as they could shout "my turn," the first-year students would be happy for a long time. Of course, there were also unhappy people. After all, not everyone could complete the illusory beast within a week. In yesterday's class, many people had their marks deducted because they couldn't make a magical beast. If it wasn't for White's generous help, Luo Boat would have been one of them. Since it wasn't time for class yet, Dake found a bench to rest on. Not long after, Deanna squeezed in with Luo C. "Dake, who do you think will win today's duel?" Deanna asked cheerfully. Dake smiled. "It's just a competition in class." "Huh?" Diana stretched out her hand and slapped her thigh, causing her whole body to bounce. "Anyway, my big white bear is already thirsty." Luo C quickly pulled Deanna's sleeve and whispered, "Control yourself. Didn't you say last night that you wanted to act more like a girl?" Deanna. Comma. Ding ding ding. The bell rang, signaling the start of class. The students stopped chatting and consciously lined up in the middle of the stadium. Professor Cheong Si was half a minute late. He walked into the stadium with a bunch of stuff. "The weather is good today. Let's run a lap to warm up." Professor Cheong Si was as valiant as ever. He didn't hold back when he gave out tasks. The students, who were full of anticipation, were all stunned. "I thought we didn't have to run today." Although the students complained, they were forced to run under the pressure of the professor. Luo Boat knew that extra points wouldn't help, so he didn't use any more strength. He controlled his speed and ran side by side with White. In the end, he couldn't help but ask, "Oh yeah, White, where did you go last night? I wanted to play around with you at 9 o'clock. White opened her mouth and said after a while, "Luo Boat, I don't have as much stamina as you. Can we talk after we finish running?" Luo Boat, "Okay." After 2 laps, apart from a few students, the first-year students of the 4 schools were all listless. Luo Boat wanted to continue asking, but Professor Cheong Si said loudly, "Those who still have energy over there, come and help." Luo Boat had no choice but to walk over with a few of the stronger students to help Professor Cheong Si set up the venue. It took about 10 minutes for the venue to be set up. The students had regained their energy and gathered in the center of the stadium. After a while, Professor Cheong Si took out a metal ball that looked like a bowling ball with 3 holes. He walked over with one hand holding it. He looked at the students of the 4 schools and asked casually, "Does anyone know what I'm holding in my hand?" The junior magisters looked at each other. More than half of them immediately raised their hands. This time, even White and Luo Boat raised their hands. Professor Cheong Si randomly picked a student. That student said excitedly, "It's a magic conducting ball, Professor." Professor Cheong Si said with satisfaction, "That's right, it's a magic conducting ball. It's the core of a magic conducting duel." She then inserted her thumb, index finger, and middle finger into the 3 holes of the magic conducting ball and continued, "The so-called magic conducting ball is also called a duel ball or a life ball. As long as magic power is poured into it like this, it can create a 360 degrees life boundary without any blind spots. Swati, tell us about the different levels of life boundaries." "Yes, Professor." Saraswati immediately stepped forward. Her wheat-colored skin was still outstanding today. The life boundaries of a magic conducting ball are generally divided into 5 levels. The strength of each level is different. A level 1 life boundary has 1,000 points of magic power, a level 2 life boundary has 2,000 points of magic power, a level 3 life boundary has 4,000 points of magic power, A level 4 life boundary has 8,000 points of magic power, and a level 5 life boundary has 16,000 points of magic power. In a magic conducting duel, only when the opponent's life boundary is completely destroyed, or when the opponent voluntarily surrenders and uses up all of their magic conducting cards can they be considered victorious. 5 points, Swati. Professor Cheong-si poured magic power into the magic conducting ball. A spherical barrier made of many hexahedrons spread out. She gently pushed forward, and the all-metal magic conducting ball slowly floated forward. The magic conducting ball circled above the students' heads and then returned to Professor Cheong-si's hand. She said, "In a formal duel, controlling the magic conducting ball to avoid the opponent's attack is a must-learn skill. Of course, we don't have that many requirements for today's duel, and we're only using the retired practice magic conducting ball. The life boundary's magic power is temporarily set at 500 points. Omega E. Chapter 42. After that, he talked about some rules that they had to pay attention to during the duel. Professor Cheong-si took out a jar full of number plates and asked the students to pick them one by one. The little mages stepped out one after another and reached into the jar to pick the number plates. Surprisingly, out of the 4 classes, there were only 78 students who managed to complete the production of the fantasy beast within a week. On average, there were less than 20 students in each class. Most of the remaining students were still in the process of failing and had to start saving credits to buy material packs. It felt like the professors had set up a trap and opened up Traveler's Street before teaching the students how to make the Phantom Beast. This was to teach the first-year students who didn't know how to control themselves and how to spend credits. Anyway, it wasn't clear if the others had learned their lesson, but White and Luo both had learned their lesson. As for whether they would change after learning their lesson, that was another matter. Dake walked to the jar and picked up a number plate. The website was https://m. Vipkanshu. VIP, good lord, I'm destined to be? Anna leaned over. Hey, what's your number? Dake. Number 7, and you? Anna, 77, hee. Luo C, 55. Inject your magic power into the number plate and take it apart. Give me the blue side. Professor Cheong-si took out an empty jar again and took back the blue number plate. Dake finally noticed that the number plate in his hand was red and blue. After injecting some magic power into it, the red and blue cards would lose their magnetic force and could be taken apart easily. After handing in the blue number plate according to Professor Cheong-si's instructions, Dake held the red number plate and waited quietly. The center of the arena was divided into 4 equal sections by props. Professor Cheong-si placed 2 magic balls in each section. The students who didn't have the Phantom Beast were responsible for injecting magic power into the magic balls and learning how to open the life enchantment. Professor Cheong-si chose another 4 people to be the judges. The competition uses a single elimination system. The winner advances, and the loser exits. There is only one champion in the world of magic duels. Professor Cheong-si casually grabbed 2 blue number plates from the jar and placed them on one side. Then, he grabbed another 2 blue number plates and placed them on the other side. He repeated this process 4 times until there were 4 sets of number plates. She flipped open the number plate and read, "In the first round, 78 will advance to 39. 4 groups will proceed simultaneously. Number 6 and number 8. Number 3 and number 28, number 66 and number 7, number 49 and number 5, get ready." Opening celebration? Dake glanced at the red number 7 in his hand and didn't seem to care. However, Anna and Luo C seemed to be more nervous than him. Dake, do your best. I'll always be on your side. Good luck. It wasn't like they were going to participate in variety shows. Dake walked to court 3 with a dark face. A total of 8 people went down the stage at the same time. Some were nervous, and some were calm. Dake glanced at contestant 66. She was a girl from the School of Magic. She had 2 ponytails, big eyes, and a pale face. He comforted her casually, "Don't be nervous. It's just a drill." Okay. The girl clenched her teeth and clenched her fingers. The two of them went to the contestant seats on both sides of the stage. In the official competition, there was a platform for the contestants to look down from above. However, here, there were only simple contestant seats drawn with white lines. Dake stood in the contestant seat and looked at the stage. The rules of the competition in class this time were simple replicas of the rules of the real competition. 1/6 of the stage near the contestant seats was divided into the summoning area. This meant that the summoning area was limited. You couldn't summon a magic fairy directly to the opponent's face. It was said that there was no such rule in the first magician duels. Therefore, the magicians often used tactical summoning to make the competition violent and chaotic. Some magicians even used line-of-sight interference to summon a large magic fairy directly to the opponent's face to block the opponent's vision. Later, the rules were gradually perfected, and this kind of farce decreased a lot. However, there was no limit to human imagination. There were still countless tricks under the rules. The referee for Court 3 was Rentgen from the House of Nobles. "Hi." Rentgen waved at Dake, looking very dispirited. There was no other way. Being a referee was equivalent to a public execution. It was their fault for not being able to create a fantasy beast in a week. Of course, Dake remembered this classmate who went shopping early on Saturday morning. It seemed that he had spent all his credits in Traveller Street. In the end, he didn't have enough credits to buy more materials for experiments. And his fellow sufferer, Civet, seemed to be next door. Dake smiled subtly. In the official duel, the deck of cards was placed on the card table in the contestant seat. The projection mechanism would enlarge the cards for the audience to see. At the same time, there were rules such as shuffling cards on the spot, starting with 5 cards, 1 round in 30 seconds, 2 cards in 1 round, and so on. The duel was divided into 3 stages. 1. Preparation stage, shuffling cards, communication, taunting, starting 2. Battle stage, drawing cards, summoning, fighting, beating, 3. End stage, communication, taunting, receiving cards, declaration. Of course, there weren't that many rules for today's duel. The twin-tailed girl from the Mage Academy was already holding the only Fantasy Beast card in her hand. She looked nervous as she waited for the referee's whistle. Dake was suddenly worried that she would break the Fantasy Beast. Both sides' magic balls had already been activated with 500 mana points. They were now floating in front of each other. Using mana to control the magic balls was an advanced technique. It wasn't within the scope of the first year's lessons. Therefore, if they wanted to move the magic balls, they could only move them physically. Rentgen. Beep. Begin preparation. Dake took out Fantasy Beast, Ibu, from his card pack and held it between his index and middle fingers. He entered the preparation stage. Rentgen. Countdown to battle, 30 seconds. Rentgen. 3, 2, 1, begin. The moment the battle began. My turn. Summoning. Dake raised his magic card in an instant. In the 8th second of the battle, he successfully summoned his Fantasy Beast. Ibu lightly landed on the ground without any hesitation. It began to run like the wind. In the 12th second of the battle, it had already run across the battlefield, which was only 10 meters away. It used its paws to press down on the magic balls floating on the ground. Omega. Ibu tilted its head and looked at the girl opposite it. It had a cute expression on its face. Then it slapped the magic balls 4 times in a row. The magic ball's life barrier were completely wiped out. The twin-tailed girl was bleeding from the cuteness. Her mana was cut off, and she hurriedly summoned a second time. Ibuzachan gently waited for her to summon her Fantasy Beast, and then gave the magic-conducting ball the final blow. Battle over. Winner. Dake Dimming. Dake sighed, put away the cards, and turned around. Boring. Boring. TSK. Chapter 43. That's it. Deanna looked at Dake as he slowly walked back. She couldn't help but blink. She felt that something was wrong. The 4 matches were going on at the same time. The others had just started fighting, and you're already back? Diana had something that she hadn't said. She didn't think Dake would win. After all, Evie didn't look like the type of magic fairy that could fight or defend. How could it be as fierce as her big white bear? But could a duel be played like this? There wasn't even a clash between magic fairies. Just by relying on a faster summoning speed, Dake was able to step on the opponent's lifeline before he could summon his magic fairy. In the end, he went easy on them. It was probably because of Dark's charity. After all, this was his first duel in his life. If he couldn't even summon his magic fairy, it would definitely be a shadow for the rest of his life. Remember the URL. Vipkanshu. 6. Of course, Diana wasn't the only one paying attention to this match. Whether it was AI Ma or White, they all turned their attention to Dake when he left the stage. But no one expected that the duel would end in such a way. AI Ma carefully measured her summoning speed. Her face turned pale. Dake was really too fast. A mere 8 seconds of summoning time had completely surpassed the level of a first-year student. She originally thought that her 12 seconds was fast enough, but now it seemed that it wasn't. This wasn't something that could be reversed by the difference in strength between magic fairies. This was a crushing defeat in terms of magic fairy level. On the other side, White's face didn't look too good either. He was determined to win the class competition this time. But if he couldn't even summon his magic fairy, how could he win? What's the casting time of my summoning again? White suddenly realized that he hadn't calculated the casting time at all. Next group, numbers 1 and 13. Professor Cheong-si directly took out the number plate for the 5th group. Luo Boat said in surprise, "It's your turn, White." White nodded and walked to court 3 with the number plate in her hand. Her steps were heavy. His opponent was a boy from the House of Fools that he didn't know. The other party looked simple and honest. However, when both parties entered the arena, the boy from the House of Fools suddenly lowered his voice and said, "Are you really the hero's son?" White was startled. She didn't understand why he would ask such a question. During the duel phase, the two of them activated their summoning techniques at almost the same time. White had summoned the stag at least 2 seconds too early, but when the stag landed, accelerated, and rushed into the opponent's summoning area, the person's summoning spell was finally completed. A black bull with a layer of rocky skin on its head suddenly appeared in front of the magic ball, blocking White's stag. However, the stag continued to charge without hesitation. With the addition of strength from the acceleration, it forcefully flipped the black bull over. White held the advantage and did not waver. In the end, she exhausted the thick-skinned water buffalo to death. Immediately after, Diana, Luo Si, AI Ma, and Luo Boat also entered the arena one after another. Diana won without any suspense. Her magical fantasy beast, Polar Bear, smashed her opponent's magical fantasy beast, Unicorn Rabbit, with one slap. Luo Si, on the other hand, was playing the role of a little white rabbit in the other match. On the other hand, AI Ma's otter barely won. AI Ma originally wanted to rely on the 12-second summoning speed to try to copy Dake's trick. However, her opponent was a top student from the School of Magic. Although he was a little slower than her, he still successfully completed the summoning in less than 14 seconds. The two magic fairies collided in the left half of the arena. AI Ma's otter was a standard, magical fantasy beast, with 100 magic attack and defense. It was at a disadvantage in a pure fight. In the end, it found an opportunity to spray a mouthful of salty soda on the opponent's magic fairy's face and turn the tables. As for Luo Boat, he was lucky to meet a student from the School of Fools. Both of them spent more than 16 seconds to summon their magic fairies. Luo Boat directly summoned Magical Fantasy Beast, Castle, on top of the magic fairy's ball. The hollow castle pieces perfectly covered the small magic fairy's ball, turning it into an unshakable fortress. This match dragged on until the end of the first round. While the students were dumbfounded, Professor Cheong-si helplessly announced that both sides advanced to the next round at the same time. In the first round, a total of 40 students advanced from 78 to 39. The second round immediately began. Dake was still in the starting lineup. His opponent was a student from the School of Aristocrats. That student was originally bragging to his friends. His magical fantasy beast was a small dragon dinosaur. In the last duel, it showed an overwhelming strength advantage. Looking at the whole arena, only Diana's polar bear could compete with him. Therefore, he was indeed qualified to brag. However, life was like this. Sometimes, it was not because you were strong enough that you could cut through all obstacles, because there were many people stronger than you. Doran entered the arena with an ashen face. When he was close to Dake, he suddenly had an idea and asked shamelessly, "Dimming, can you let me summon my magical fantasy beast before we fight?" Dake's face was indifferent. "What do you think?" Doran could only laugh twice and walk down the path that was doomed to failure. F***CK. 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 Doran, who was quickly defeated, immediately ran into the bathroom and hammered the sink. "Damn it, it's just a bit faster. Why are you so arrogant? You must have learned summoning before entering the school. Or else, with that little fox. F***CK. Don't let me catch up with you." After scolding and crying, he went out as a proud and elegant aristocrat. Doran walked out of the bathroom with slightly red eyes and just happened to see the only opponent in his mind, Diana and Luo Boat of the School of Knights dueling. In the kingdom, the Doran family and the Greybale family were competitors on the surface, but the relationship between the two families was actually not that bad. He and Diana had met a long time ago during a family visit. But the heartless Diana did not remember him at all. This made him feel lost for a long time. And Luo Boat, who was opposite him, as the follower of the son of Braveheart, was just a disgusting small character in his eyes. But Luo Boat's magical fantasy beast, Castle, was really eye-catching and made people vigilant. "Doran, you're back?" "Yes, I went to the toilet." Doran showed a flawless smile and asked his companions, "How is it? Our kingdom's bear should not disappoint, right?" A little fatty with his arms crossed in front of his chest raised his chin and said proudly, "See for yourself." Doran turned his head and looked over. Roar! Diana's polar bear roared fiercely and inserted its fingers into the gap between the castle and the ground, lifting the heavy castle up by force. Chapter 44. Dolan, W. W. Ha 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 ha. Diana watched her white bear lift Luo Boat's tortoise shell little by little. She couldn't help but laugh with her hands on her hips. Luo Boat, on the other hand, looked like he had seen a ghost. He opened his mouth so wide that you could stuff a goose egg in it. "Don't just stand there, Luo Boat." White, who was watching the battle, couldn't help but shout. But Luo Boat didn't know what else he could do, other than forcefully closing his mouth. The students of the Knight Academy who had laughed at Luo Boat the night before, but who had been slapped in the face in the first round, actually laughed without any malice. After all, it was really funny. His castle was about to be overturned by the big white bear. Remember, https://m. Vipkanchu. VIP Luo Boat finally couldn't help but shout, "Defend!" The castle finally responded to his call for the first time. A layer of yellow light flowed over the walls. It was obvious that the castle had become harder after using the Fortify skill, and the earthy yellow barrier could help it absorb the impact better. However, defend was still defend, not take root. What should be overturned will be overturned. Ow! The polar bear broke out with the power of a bear and completely overturned Luo Boat's castle in one breath. After that, the magic ball was no longer protected. As Diana commanded the polar bear to completely destroy the magic ball's life barrier, this unequal duel was officially over. Luo Boat's face was ugly as he left the field. He finished the handover with White. "Brother, I'm counting on you now." White, "Don't worry, I'll succeed." Luo Boat, "This is our last chance." White, "There's no what if." Diana shook the card and recalled the polar bear. She happily skipped away. When she saw Luo C and Dake, she trotted over and patted her chest proudly. "What do you think? Is my bear big? Dake gave a rare thumbs up. Big. Numbers 13 and 16. Professor Cheung-si announced the number of the next group. White and Luo both quivered and turned their heads at the same time, looking in the same direction. AI Marmotes was watching the match alone. She suddenly noticed that someone was looking at her, so she couldn't help but turn her head to look at them. Coincidentally, her eyes met with two people's. Hey! Carrot carrot. They separated upon contact. AI Ma turned around, looking a little unhappy. White and Luo both looked at each other and stood up at the same time. Luo both couldn't help but say, "Don't lose." White's eyes were slightly dignified. "I won't, as long as I'm not slower than her." After trying it out in the previous round, Victor had already figured out his summoning speed. Although he didn't practice for a long time, his usual summoning time had been compressed to 12 seconds, which was almost the same as AI Ma's. He even thought that as long as he concentrated a little more, he could further compress this time by 1 second. If it was 11 seconds, he would have a chance even if he dueled with Dake. The temporary field was only 10 meters. Although 10 meters seemed short, it could be crossed in a few steps. However, it would take some time to summon a magic guide fairy to land. Not to mention that it took time to accelerate. As long as he could successfully summon the magical fairy before the life enchantment was completely destroyed, the little fox with low attack and defense shouldn't be a match for Stag. Coincidentally, White and Doran had the same thought. Of course, now wasn't the time to think about this. White was very clear that his current opponent was AI Ma. There won't be a problem. AI Ma's otter is very weak. The only thing you need to be careful of is that it can spray water. White and AI Ma walked past each other, but neither of them spoke. The new mages were still too naive and couldn't grasp the trash-talking part at all. The field was divided into red and blue sides. White stood on the red side, and AI Ma stood on the blue side. The referee was Civet from the House of Nobles. Civet looked at the two key students of the Night Academy meeting in the second round and seemed to be gloating. However, he still had to blow the whistle. Beep, ready. White and AI Ma immediately held the Magic Fantasy card in their hands. Outside the field, Dake, Deanna, and Luo Si walked over together. He was also very concerned about this match. Deanna whispered, "Dake, who do you think will win?" Dake squinted slightly. On the surface, White has the upper hand, but in reality. Deanna, in reality? Dake, they are not simple. Deanna, Battle begins. 11.5 seconds later. White broke through the limit and completed the summoning spell before AI Ma. The majestic stag appeared in the white light, its huge antlers like tree branches fiercely facing the front. Start running. In less than half a second. AI Ma also completed the summoning spell before 12 seconds were up. The otter that was similar in size to little Ibu slid when it was about to hit the ground, avoiding the stag's charging path and nimbly choosing to run in a circle. AI Ma's thinking was very clear. In terms of strength, her otter was definitely no match for White Stag. But the ultimate goal of the duel was not to defeat the opponent's magic elf, but to break the magic sphere's life enchantment. Even though she failed to imitate Dake in the last match, AI Ma still learned from it and opened up her thinking. At this time, most of the first-year students were still immersed in the duel between magic elves and didn't understand the essence of a magic duel. Seeing AI Ma's otter pouncing on his magic sphere like the wind, White's heart tightened slightly, and he hurriedly called the stag back to defend. This move made him lose his first chance to win. The stag's attack was obviously stronger than the otter's, plus it started first and the straight line distance was shorter, so he would definitely win. But he didn't have this thought yet. The stag that returned to defend couldn't catch up with the nimble otter, causing the magic sphere's life enchantment to be bitten by the otter and lose a whole chunk of its magic. But the otter didn't dare to continue, and immediately threw away the magic sphere and ran away. After the stag returned to defend, it protected the magic sphere, its 4 hooves tapping slightly hurriedly. White was also slightly nervous. He thought that AI Ma would be very difficult to deal with, but he didn't expect it to be this difficult. No, This stalemate isn't a solution. I have to think of an idea. White's mind turned, and he immediately had an idea. Under his command, the stag lowered its head and pushed the magic sphere up, then stuck it between the two antlers. Perfect. White's heart calmed down. AI Ma's otter didn't dare to confront the stag head-on, which made White feel that victory was in his hands. He immediately directed the stag to rush toward AI Ma's magic sphere. This was using what he had learned on the spot. But when the stag started running, AI Ma suddenly directed the otter to approach. The otter seized the opportunity, opened its mouth, and sprayed out a water gun, hitting the magic sphere stuck between the antlers. That magic sphere flew up in an instant. At the same time, its magic power also dropped a lot. A sure kill skill? White wasn't shocked but happy. The sure kill skill of a 1-star magic elf card was usually a skill that consumed 50 magic power. For a magic elf with only 100 magic power, it could only release one shot. In other words, the otter was no longer a threat now. He immediately directed the stag to catch the magic sphere again. But just as the stag caught the magic sphere, the otter, who shouldn't have been able to release a sure kill skill with magic power, actually shot out a water gun again. This water gun was obviously trained, and the shooting was extremely accurate. The red magic sphere was hit away again. The 500 magic power had dropped to 200 points. White stared at AI Ma's otter. The otter, who should have dissipated on the spot because of the 100 magic power, was still standing there full of energy. What the hell is going on? Turning his gaze, White finally discovered that AI Ma still had a card in her hand. A group of LSPs, the senior sister is far ahead equals looking for a recommendation. Panduola looking for a recommendation. Chapter 45. The Second Magic Card. In the eyes of the little mages, this was simply cheating. Why did AI Ma have 2 magic cards when they only had one? Professor, she's cheating. Luo Boat roared in his heart. How can AI Ma do this? Doesn't she know that this is our last hope? No. She's so smart, she must have known. That's why she specially got the second magic card, just to stop us from paying the debt. While Luo Boat was inexplicably angry, White in the field was also somewhat affected. But he was still calm. The magic ball's defense was 0 by default, so once it was hit, the magic of the enchantment of life would directly decrease. AI Ma had already hit the magic ball 3 times, but the enchantment of life still had 200 points of magic left. It should be able to withstand the next attack. Website: https://m. Vipkanchu. VIP, let's decide the winner before the second attack comes. White muttered in a low voice, suddenly raised Magic Beast, Stag, and shouted, "Shine, light of the soul!" In an instant, the stag on the field suddenly raised its head, releasing an unusually strong light from between its 2 horns. Ultimate skill: Light of the Soul. Magic cost: 50. Cooldown: 60s. The ultimate skill of a 1-star magic fairy usually had a cooldown of 30 seconds. More than 30 SCD usually meant high power. The Light of the Soul illuminated half of the field, and the otter had nowhere to hide. White couldn't help but smile proudly. AI Ma, on the other hand, suddenly raised the card in her hand. Ding dong! There was a slight sound like gold coins hitting each other. A phi symbol appeared in the otter's eyes at the same time. It was the symbol that represented the kingdom's holy coins. Gold coins x3. The magic card in AI Ma's hand was such a simple card. Every gold coin could be used to recharge the magic guide fairy. Each recharge was 50 points of magic, which could shorten the cooldown of one ultimate skill. It could be recharged a total of 3 times. This meant that her otter could still release 2 ultimate skills, just enough to finish off the magic ball with 200 points of magic left. The premise was that it could survive. Seeing that the otter couldn't withstand the Light of the Soul, AI Ma had no choice but to recharge it twice in a row, allowing the otter to barely survive with 50 points of magic left. At the same time, White Stag only had 50 points of magic left. After 3 to 5 minutes of summoning, the magic fairy would begin to consume its own magic. Once it consumed 1 point, the 2 magic fairies could no longer release their skills. Werther's eyes were sharp and full of fighting spirit. "Charge and kill it, stag!" AI Ma screamed. "Avoid it! Go around the field!" The small field, which was only 10 meters long, was actually not enough to support the stag's speed. The relatively agile otter had the advantage in its evasive maneuvers. Emma nervously observed the cards in Victor's hand, and reached for her card bag again. On the other side, Victor had also noticed Emma's actions and could not help but want to curse, "There's more. Damn it, I can't hide it anymore. I wanted to save it to deal with the dimming." Victor gritted his teeth and pulled out his second card from his card pack. Yes, he also had a second magic card. Luo Boat saw that White also had a second card and immediately said excitedly, "What did I say? White never disappoints." Famous double criteria. Anna couldn't help but ask, "Dake, why do they have so many cards?" Dake stared at White's second magic card and raised his eyebrows. He sensed a familiar aura. Seeing that the battle was intensifying, the students outside the field gradually became more and more excited. Especially the players from the Night Academy, they were all cheering with pride. Although most people didn't have a good impression of the 2 players on the field. One was the son of a hero, but he was at the bottom of the pack. The other was a top student who thought he was smart and isolated himself from the crowd. But this didn't stop them from being students of the Night Academy. On the field, White and AI Ma raised their magic cards almost at the same time. Forbidden Love. Golden Treasure Box. The magic card in White's hand released a pink mist, faintly forming the outline of a woman. The magic card in AI Ma's hand released a dazzling golden light, dazzling everyone's eyes. On the field, the pink light and the golden light competed for brilliance. The stag and the otter stared at each other. The otter's eyes actually turned into the shape of heart suit. The stag's eyes turned into the shape of Phi. Both of them didn't expect that the opponent's magic card would have the same nature as theirs. The otter was attracted by Forbidden Love and was controlled by White in a single round. The stag was attracted by the Golden Treasure Box and was controlled by AI Ma in a single round. Both of their magic elves exchanged control in an instant. "It's over." The moment he saw the situation clearly, White's heart fell to the bottom. On the other hand, AI Ma was ecstatic and said with unprecedented excitement, "Stag, attack the red magic ball." The magic ball that was sent flying by the otter was still floating in the air. The stag suddenly sprinted. Before the otter could move, it charged with its giant horn and smashed the life enchantment on the magic ball. Bang! The enchantment turned into specks of starlight and dissipated. "We won, we won." AI Ma jumped up suddenly. At this moment, she finally had the emotions that a child her age should have. Her chubby little face was flushed red. She was extremely excited. White was at a loss. "We lost just like that. This is impossible. How could we lose to AI Ma? Where's dimming?" The magic card that fell from his hand shook out lilacs. The pink mist retracted into the card and gradually turned back into a blurry human figure. This was originally the flower card of the Love Divination card. Now, the Forbidden Love magic card could not successfully reverse his defeat. This was the victory of hard work. It was the defeat of laziness. How could this be? Luo Boat shouted in despair outside the field. Before White went on the field, he said that as long as he was not slower than her, he would win. "It's over, it's completely over. After 1 point, it's a debt of 1,280 credits. I'll never be able to repay it." In Luo Boat's mind, the scene of AI Ma holding the IOU, stepping on their backs, and using a witch's sharp voice to scold them to mop the floor like slaves emerged. Sigma, Sigma. Too tragic. Dake was already lost in thought. Gold coins charging, Golden Treasure Box. Is this the value of currency? Then what about Forbidden Love? That should be the flower card, right? How in the world did Victor make the flower card into a magic card? If I follow him, will I be able to find the source of the flower card? The defeat of the hero's son did not affect the continuation of the competition. When White came out of the field, he was not greeted by Luo Boat, who was in despair, but by a few boys from the Knights' Academy. "Well done, White, you're really something." One of the boys with a sunny face patted him on the shoulder and encouraged him. Another boy also nudged his arm and comforted him. "Don't be discouraged, your opponent is AI Ma after all." White's expression stiffened. He was not in a good mood. P.S. Those with votes, please vote. Those without votes are here to support me. Thank you, brothers. Chapter 46. The disappointed White and the despairing Luo Boat turned into petrified statues in the wind. But the atmosphere of the competition was heated up because of White and AI Ma. The third round of 20 to 10. Originally, there were 4 groups, but now there were only 2 groups. When Dake went on stage again, a group of girls quickly gathered outside the arena. These girls were mainly from the aristocratic academy, but there were also students from the other 3 academies. Especially the girls from the Magic Academy. They had no resistance to those students who were good at studying, self-disciplined, and handsome, as if they had walked out of a book. Of course, they were still in the age where they would be shy if their fingertips touched. They were simply attracted to them. In the arena, Dake looked at the students from the Knight Academy. This time, he didn't give them any chance. Remember the URL? Vipkanshu. 6. Even though there was no entertainment value, such a clean victory still had its own unique flavor. The 4th round of 10 to 5. There were still no exceptions. The 3rd round of 5 to 3. The 5 contestants were Dake and D. Anna from the Aristocratic Academy, AI Ma from the Knight Academy, Saraswati from the Magic Academy, and another male student from the Magic Academy. Dake was lucky enough to have a bye. The 2 students from the Magic Academy fought against D. Anna and AI Ma respectively. In the end, the 2 students from the Magic Academy couldn't cross the high wall. Saraswati from the Sorcerer's Institute displayed great strength, but she was still no match for Emma and was defeated. The other male student was defeated by D. Anna's violence. The 4th round of 3 to 2. This time, the Goddess of Luck favored D. Anna. Therefore, the semi-finals were between Dake and AI Ma. Although this was only the semi-finals, in the eyes of the students from the Aristocratic Academy and the Knight Academy, it was the finals. The finals that would decide the champion between the Aristocratic Academy and the Knight Academy. This strong confrontation attracted everyone's attention. Even White and Luo Boat, who were almost weathered, came back to life. No matter how much they complained about AI Ma, they still stood on the side of the Knight Academy. Under the gaze of all the students from the 4 schools, Professor Cheong-si personally stepped onto the stage as the referee. Dake and AI Ma entered the arena separately and stood in their respective positions. The duelists could draw their cards during the preparation stage. Doc and Emma both took out the only fantasy beast in their hands. Dake's face was expressionless. AI Ma was obviously a little nervous. Dake dimming. AI Ma suddenly plucked up her courage and said. Although Dake was puzzled, he still looked at him. However, AI Ma gritted her teeth and finally said, "I won't lose to you." Dake's heart skipped a beat. He wanted to say, "Have we ever interacted before?" But in the end, he didn't say such embarrassing words. "Dake, I've seen your efforts." AI Ma. If you have something to say it after the match. Keep your mind and focus on the match. Professor Cheong-si suddenly interrupted the exchange between the 2 and began the countdown. These 2 had given her a big surprise in this in-class competition. She really wanted to know who would be the winner in the end. Would it be Dake, who had relied on his excellent summoning skills to advance without any suspense? Or would it be AI Ma, who had relied on 2 extra magic cards to get to where she was now? Perhaps it was the joy of a teacher to be able to see her students grow beyond her expectations. She lightly raised her hand, and a 3-second countdown appeared in the center of the arena. 3, 2, 1, begin. He was fully focused on racing. Without any hesitation, Doc summoned his illusory beast first. But it was different from the previous times. Ivan didn't immediately run to the other side. Instead, he jogged to the center of the arena. AI Ma summoned her fantasy beast, Otter, at the 11.5-second mark. Ivan stood up and extended his claws at the otter. The otter, with an intelligence level of 2.0, reacted after a while. It rushed at Ivan and made a series of ing sounds. Ing-ee. Ivan stretched out his claws again and waved his hand. The otter carefully came to the center of the arena. Two magic elves with a magic attack and defense of 100, and their sizes were almost the same. They began a close confrontation in the center of the arena. Ing. The otter opened its mouth and made a deterrent sound. Ing-ee. Ivan tilted his head and used, "Act cute." Otter immediately grinned and began to chuckle. So Ivan walked past it calmly and ran briskly to AI Ma's magic ball. AI Ma was subconsciously stunned. Then she noticed that Dake had used a new magic card. What kind of magic card is this? Looking at the otter sauce that could only laugh foolishly and had completely lost its ability to fight, AI Ma's little brain almost stopped working. Of course, she couldn't just sit and wait. She immediately took out her strongest card, Golden Treasure Box. Now that Gold Coins X3 had lost its effect, only this golden treasure chest could bring her a little bit of warmth. However, her summoning skill had a cooldown of 15 seconds. Unlike Dake, whose cooldown had been reduced to 8 seconds, she still needed to wait for a while before she could use a new magic card. When her summoning skill's cooldown was over, Ivan had already pressed his paw on the magic ball, just like before. Pa! A claw. The magic ball's magic value -100. Pa! Another claw. The magic ball's magic value -100. Otter sauce, cheer up. AI Ma finally couldn't help but shout. The otter seemed to have heard her voice. It suddenly broke free from the psychedelic effect of the happy card. The moment it turned around, it spat out a water gun. But Ivan grabbed the magic ball and blocked it. Bang! The magic ball's magic value -100. But the magic ball was also hit by the water gun's impact. Good chance. AI Ma immediately seized the opportunity and used her summoning skill to activate the golden treasure box. 11.5 seconds later, a treasure box full of gold appeared on the field. But Ivan on the field had unknowingly puffed out his chest, his eyes full of arrogance. When the golden treasure box appeared in front of him, he just smiled contemptuously and walked past it with elegant steps. Then, he slapped the magic ball. Pa! The magic ball's magic value -100. When the otter rushed back, he had already raised his paw again. Pa! There was still no head-on confrontation. There was no killing between the magic elves. There was only a crisp pa-pa sound that hit the ears. Dake didn't even use Pride 2 to end the match. He put Ivan back into the card, put it in the card bag together with Happy Card and Pride Eye, and turned to leave the field. As if this semi-final match was no different from the warm-up of the first match. In fact, it was the same. The level of the first-year students was too low. When AI Ma used 2 magic cards, he had already used 3. This made this duel seem meaningless. Because the whole process was too strange, the audience outside the field didn't even react. There was only sparse applause when he left the field. Then, the applause became louder and louder. It shook the stadium. The finals that followed were even more meaningless. Anna's summoning speed was already considered fast, but she couldn't squeeze into 13 seconds. She couldn't even summon the polar bear that she was most proud of and was killed in the competition. In the end, even Professor Cheong-si couldn't help but facepalm. This was the first time in her teaching history that such a competition had happened. The difference was too great. It was the first time that the book was updated. Please vote. Chapter 47. At the end of the duel class. After Professor Cheong-si gave out 1,000 credits as the champion's prize, he invited Dake to the stage. Dake, who had not yet fully grown, stood beside Professor Cheong-si. His head only reached the bottom of Cheong-Si's sphere. Professor Cheong-Si, who had 1/16 of the giant bloodline, was too big. Dake tried his best to maintain a slight smile on his face as he calmly faced the chattering students below the stage. Professor Cheong-Si said, "Dimming, you don't mind teaching the students some learning secrets, right?" Dake said cheerfully, "Of course I don't mind." Professor Cheong-Si said with satisfaction, "Then I'll leave the rest to you." Dake nodded, took a step to the center, and said, "Actually, there are no shortcuts to learning. Other than self-discipline, there is also temperance. Those who can restrain themselves have the most prestige. But if you restrain yourself too much, sometimes it will have the opposite effect. Therefore, moderation is also very important. Whether it's moderation of desire or learning, it's necessary. I personally prefer to strike a balance between work and rest. I use some interesting content to relieve the boredom of learning and give the brain some time to rest. Moreover, everyone is the architect of their own fate." Dake spoke for about a quarter of an hour. Some people understood the logic behind it, while others just wanted it to end quickly so they could eat. This was like the road of life, where there was a sign at a fork in the road. The left was rugged but led to the peak, while the right was smooth but led to the valley. Most people would still choose to walk on the right. The so-called reason was precisely because one knew it but did not practice it. That was why it was only reason. Dake could only speak truthfully about his feelings over the past month. He left the stage amidst the applause, which was somewhat fake. Then, it was Friday afternoon. Travelers Street was open again. Dake took out his school card to check. Credits. 1570. Compared to the first opening of Travelers Street, the first-year students this week were a lot more reserved. In short, it was definitely not because he did not have enough credits. Fortunately, some ordinary consumer goods were actually not that expensive. 1 academic credit was enough to order a cup of coffee and sit comfortably in the Forest Coffee Shop on Travelers Street for an entire day. Before heading to Travelers Street, Dake once again took out the notebook used to record items. Compared to last week's list of items, there were a few more items this week. These items were containers that could be used to store mental matter for a long time. Magic Brain Bottle, one of the alchemy tools of the Magic Brain series. It stores emotions, desires, knowledge, and other substances in a simulated magic brain. The advantage is that it is active and can be stored for a long time. The disadvantage is that it is active and may cause the stored items to be contaminated and deteriorated. Insect Tree, a type of potted plant with branches that resemble insects. It can inject emotions, desires, knowledge, and other substances into the insect branches. Since the insect branches are essentially plants, there is no need to worry about the stored substances being contaminated. The downside is that the insect tree dies, making it difficult to cultivate. Advanced Thinking Bottle. The advanced version of the thinking bottle. Other than being very expensive, there's no harm in it. The shelf life can be extended to a month. But in fact, these things were very expensive. It was just that the advanced thinking bottle was more expensive. Dake's first goal today was to choose one to purchase. The peak period of people squeezing into Travelers Street was from 12 to 12:30. Dake purposely waited until 12:30 to walk out of the Noble House's Tower Road. On the way to the castle gate, he unexpectedly met White, Luo Boat, and AI Ma. It was them on Monday as well? Dake recalled what happened on Monday and kept an eye out. AI Ma Métis combed her fluffy brown hair and fixed it with a cute cat hair clip. She even put some powder on her face to make her skin look fairer. She had never dressed up to this extent before. The impression she gave off had changed a lot. Could it be that the defeat in the duel was too much of a blow to her? Dake couldn't help but wonder. On the other side, White and Luo Boat were still the same as before. After losing their last chance, they finally decided to apologize for their previous quarrel and beg for AI Ma's forgiveness. "I've already apologized, AI Ma." Luo Boat once again blocked AI Ma. AI Ma puffed up her cheeks and was a little angry. "So I said I heard it. Can you move aside?" White hurriedly pulled Luo Boat's arm. She didn't know how the apology had developed to this point. Luo Boat's thinking was probably still at the level of a child. He thought that everything would be over as long as he apologized. But White had experienced a lot. She knew that apologies wouldn't solve the problem most of the time. They were actually here to beg AI Ma to give up on collecting the debt. That was a total of 640 credits, and in half an hour it would double to 1280 credits. If it were them, they definitely wouldn't give up on the debt so easily. White couldn't help but blush when she remembered her previous bold words about paying off the debt. She had no choice but to say, "AI Ma, we already know that we were wrong. We shouldn't have forced you to lend us money to buy the magic chess, and we shouldn't have insulted you after that. AI Ma, you've already said this before. I also accepted your apology, so can you get out of here immediately?" "No." Werther mustered up his courage as the son of a hero and said shamelessly, "So, can we clear the debt? For example, change the contract and fix the debt at 640 credits?" Luo Boat interrupted, "640 is already a lot." Hiss. White was dumbfounded. She wanted to immediately seal his stinky mouth. AI Ma sneered and looked at Luo Boat. This time she finally said straightforwardly, "You don't owe me 640 credits. 5 credits. White. Give me back 5 credits, and we're even." White's ears trembled. He thought he heard wrong. "What do you mean? How can it be 5 credits?" AI Ma said, "Look at the school rules, White. Credits are a special currency used within the Shang Molian. It's impossible for the school to not have regulations on loans. Loans that exceed 10 times the principal amount are invalid in the school. Starting from 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday, the contract is invalid. You just need to pay me back the principal." White's whole body was about to split. "But you said before," AI Ma angrily said, "because Luo Boat insulted me." "I'm not happy to tell you. What's wrong?" "White, Luo Boat." AI Ma suddenly pulled out her school card. 5 credits, White, hurry up. There's a Shang Molian women's tea party at the Forest Coffee Shop this afternoon. If you're late because of you." White hurriedly swiped the card and paid off the debt. The burden that had been on his shoulders for a whole week suddenly disappeared. White's whole body was floating. He always felt like his feet were off the ground and he could fly. But after AI Ma took back her school card, she didn't give him any face. "Also, White, I think it's necessary to remind you to stop hanging out with Luo Boat. Think of your parents who passed away." Chapter 48. AI Ma left the last ripple and left without looking back. But the atmosphere between White and Luo Boat froze in an instant. Only Dake, who was a heartless eating machine, finished the entire melon. Combined with what he saw on Monday, as well as the two's many abnormalities, Dake more or less guessed the development of the situation. But what he couldn't understand was how the trio had ended up in such a state of disintegration. Just because he didn't put pressure on them? It couldn't be that bad, right? However, it had to be said that Doc was interested in the follow-up development. AI Ma, White, and Luo Boat completely broke up. The relationship between White and Luo Boat was also severed because of AI Ma's last ripple. Website: https://m. Vipkanchu. VIP next. Would White turn to AI Ma to repair the old relationship, or would she have a stronger relationship with Luo Boat? Wow, I feel like I'm watching a drama. It wasn't too late to go to Traveler's Street later, so Dake continued to eat. In any case, White did listen to AI Ma's last words. The key was that Luo Boat's crazy behavior this week made him realize that AI Ma's warning was not without reason. Yes, White gradually realized the root of the problem. This was the main reason why the atmosphere gradually became stiff. Before the air completely froze, Luo Boat finally couldn't help but say, "No way? White, you didn't really listen to AI Ma's words and want to." White laughed and patted Luo Boat's shoulder. "What are you talking about?" "Luo Boat, we've been friends since school started. How about it? Since this damn debt doesn't exist, should we go to Traveler's Street or go back and play a game?" "Ha, don't scare me." Luo Boat sighed in relief. Of course we should go back, to the library? Werther froze on the spot and said in astonishment, "No way? The library?" Luo Boat also laughed and said, "I haven't finished my math and magic history homework, right?" AI Ma probably didn't expect that her last words to White would have a greater impact on Luo Boat than on White. Amidst the stagnant atmosphere, Robert finally realized that if he didn't make any changes, he might lose this hero's son as a friend. Seeing that the two of them were really heading towards the library, Doc's gaze gradually turned strange. He could not help but walk out from the corner. Did he choose the path of a gay friend? How long can she last? Once there was a crack in the relationship, it wasn't easy to repair it. Dake suddenly felt that this melon was tasteless again. He shook his head and walked in the direction where AI Ma disappeared. Speaking of which, why would AI Ma want to participate in the women's tea party? Why did she change? AI Ma Métis, of course, wanted to try the so-called work and rest after hearing Dake's speech. That was to use some interesting content to relieve the boredom of studying and give the brain some time to rest so that the brain could work more efficiently. She learned about the women's tea party at Travelers Street when she passed by Forest Coffee Shop last week. A maid gave her a flyer. She threw the flyer away at the time, but her memory was good enough. Forest Coffee Shop was a coffee shop with a real forest theme. As long as the customers stepped into the shop, they would enter the range of the forest venue card. In the quiet environment of the giant trees, enjoying the aftertaste of the mellow coffee was a special feeling. This time, the women's tea party was held by the senior students in the name of a reading club. It was mainly for the exchange of reading between the young ladies of the literature department. AI Ma felt that this kind of entertainment might be suitable for her. So in order to become better, she stepped out of the cage of seeking knowledge that imprisoned her. A person's personality wasn't innate. Even if a character had an early personality in a work, it would change with the development of the work. It could be a fall or growth. It depended on the character. Dake had a deep understanding of this. He followed AI Ma into the pavilion in the middle of the lake. He chose one of the two empty stone tables and sat down on one of the stone blocks. He slightly twisted his butt and luckily transferred. He walked out of the pavilion in the middle of the lake again and crossed the garden bridge known as the Replacement Bridge to enter Travelers Street. After not seeing each other for a week, Travelers Street became a bit unfamiliar. Dake wasn't in a hurry to go to Morgan's store. Instead, he strolled around a shop that sold flowers and potted plants. It was forbidden to keep animals in the castle of St. Marian Academy, but no one forbade them from growing flowers and plants. Even Professor Thompson of Potionology would occasionally mention some interesting potted plants in his class and recommend that the students try to grow them. For example, the cat grass in front of Dake. As soon as he entered the shop, Dake's attention was attracted by the cat grass placed in the most conspicuous place. He almost forgot the purpose of his visit, the worm tree. The so-called cat grass was a type of plant that, except for its tail and roots, was completely a cat's plant. Every spring and autumn, beautiful flowers would grow on top of the cat grass's head. The academy prohibited the raising of cats, but allowed the raising of cat grass. This was a difficult mystery to solve. Although the roots of the cat grass had to be planted in the soil, if they wanted to, they could drag the flower pot around. And if they left the soil for a short period of time, they wouldn't immediately wither. More importantly, they could also meow, and had most of the cat's habits other than excretion and eating. In other words, raising cat grass didn't even require cleaning its feces and cat food. Instead, it was replaced by a potion called cat juice. Every day, the cat grass would be watered with cat juice and brought out to bask in the sun. It would be enough to raise it. According to Dake's knowledge, after Travelers Street was opened last week, many girls' dorms had an additional pot of cat grass. For example, Luo C bought an orange pot of Garfield. Cats are really good companions for healing the body and mind. Dake couldn't help but express his thoughts as he scratched the chin of a short-eared cat. Do you think so too? Suddenly, a familiar aura came from behind. Dake suddenly trembled, like a kitten that had met a lion. His toes tensed up. Orchid fragrance gently stroked the back of his neck. Even without turning around, Dake could feel the heavy pressure. Dake maintained his posture of playing with the cat and asked curiously, "Senior, why are you here too?" Panduola chuckled and said, "I followed you here." Dake, "Oh, you bought cat juice?" Panduola, "You're so hard to fool. Please recommend me Heart Suit." Chapter 49. Dake and Panduola didn't interact much. Most of the time, they only exchanged a few words during the registration process. But in order to prevent Bliss +1, Dake would always run away after registering. It was just that he had been in and out of the library too many times, so they were familiar with each other. Even though this wasn't what he wanted to see, he slowly moved away from Panduola's pressure and stood up calmly, smoothing out the creases on his clothes. Dake turned around and said, "Hello, Senior." Panduola blinked, the heart-shaped dragon scales under her eyes reflecting a magnificent color. She crossed her arms and said with her head held high, "Are you here to buy catgrass?" Dake didn't want to buy it at first, but on second thought, raising a pot of catgrass in the dormitory didn't seem like a bad idea. Raising a cat was indeed a good way to mediate the mind. Remember the URL. Vipkanshu. 6. It was good for soothing emotions and reducing stress. Especially cats that didn't need to be cleaned. If used properly, it might be even better than those legendary magic tools in reducing fury. "I'll just buy a pot." But before that, he needed to buy a pot of wormwood. Dake wouldn't mess up the order. If he bought the catgrass and didn't have enough credits to buy the wormwood, wouldn't that be putting the cart before the horse? So he thought for a while and said, "I do have this idea, but not now." Panduola said enthusiastically, "Is there something you're worried about? If you don't have enough credits, I can provide an interest-free loan. You can pay it back in a month. How about it?" "What are you trying to do with this skillful method of yours?" Dake's face darkened, and he hurriedly said, "I have other things to do, so I won't disturb Senior." As he spoke, he had already taken half a step forward. However, Senior Sister Pandora had finally found this coincidental opportunity, so how could she let him go so easily? When Dake wanted to take the other half of his foot, Panduola had already blocked his way, squinting her eyes and smiling. "Do you have an appointment with someone? Don't tell me it's that little girl who always sits behind you?" She was talking about AI Ma. Dake didn't take this opportunity to run away, but said seriously, "Senior, I'm still young." Panduola was stunned, and asked curiously, "Duola, don't like to be called young?" Dark said with a straight face, "This is an objective fact." Panduola smiled, "Then I can only look forward to when you're older." Looking at her moist pink lips opening and closing, Dark felt that he was about to lose control of his primal strength. He hurriedly said, "Let's talk later." Then, he forcefully crossed the line and hurriedly ran away. "We'll talk about it when the time comes?" That's not cute. After leaving the cat flower and wood shop, Dark turned around and entered the Goo bird flower and wood shop that was not far away. Dake gave up trying to figure out what kind of bird the cuckoo bird was and stepped into it. The main product of Goo Nyao flower and wood shop was a kind of tree stump bonsai called chirping tree. It could make a chirping sound when the sun shone on it. It was a natural alarm clock that was very suitable to be kept in the dormitory. Dake flew past all kinds of strange chirping trees. Suddenly, his spirit was lifted. He saw a worm tree planted in a flower pot in the corner. Worm tree was the cheaper option among the three, and it was also Dake's first choice. Compared to magical brain bottle and high-grade thinking bottle, insect tree's weakness was obvious. One was that the shelf life was greatly affected by the growth of the insect tree itself. Once it was not nurtured properly, it would easily cause holes to appear in the branches, and the substances stored in the branches would flow out. Sometimes, some of the substances would even be absorbed by the branches themselves. The other was that there wasn't much of it to store. Each mature worm branch could only store 1 to 3 demon brain droppers, depending on the thickness and length of the worm branch. But it also has very obvious advantages. First of all, each worm branch was separated, and different emotions could be stored in different branches. Secondly, It wasn't that expensive. Dake asked about the appearance of the worm tree, its age, and other questions, and finally asked the key question, how many credits does it cost? The owner of Goo Goo Niao Flower and Wood Shop was a fat auntie. She sized up Dake and kindly said, "This isn't something that a first-year student can afford to raise. Just the price alone is 800 credits, and if you want to raise it well, you'll have to buy the corresponding magic potions. The magic potions are different every season, and it's very troublesome." Dake thought for a moment, how many credits does a magic potion cost? The fat auntie was stunned, and then smiled. The autumn magic potion costs 30 credits per bottle, and can be used for a month. The winter magic potion costs 50 credits per bottle, and can be used for a month as well. Dake thought carefully and felt that it was acceptable. It felt like Insect Tree was paid in installments, with a down payment of 800 credits, and a monthly loan. On the other hand, the Magic Brain Bottle and Advanced Thinking Bottle were paid off in one go. The key point was that from the price of this Insect Tree, he probably couldn't afford the Magic Brain Bottle and Advanced Thinking Bottle. Dake didn't continue to think about it. He noted down the few points that the fat auntie said he needed to pay attention to when raising Insect Tree, and then bought the pot of Insect Tree and a bottle of Autumn Magic Potion. The pot of Insect Tree was about 80 centimeters tall, and there were 8 branches that looked like caterpillars, and the material was quite similar to a rubber rod. After putting it in a black bag, Dake poked his head out and glanced at the Cat Flower and Wood Shop. After confirming that Panduola had left, he went in. He had really decided to buy catnip grass. "I have 740 credits left, more than I thought." Dake estimated that he could still buy a lot of things, so he strolled around the Cat Flower and Wood Shop. There were a lot of cat grass in the shop, and there were all kinds of varieties. Moreover, the cat grass looked very obedient. Every one of them was irresistible. But as he strolled around, Dake suddenly realized that something was wrong. Because in front of him, there was a snake. It was a cobra with its tail buried in a flower pot. When Dake saw it, it opened its eyes very sharply, and swayed its slender snake body in front of Dake's eyes. He was shocked on the spot. "Don't be afraid." The clerk of the Cat Flower and Wood Shop was a young lady in her early 20s. Her hair was tied up behind her head with a hairband, and she wore an apron and gloves. She looked very plain. Perhaps she saw that Dake had been strolling around for a long time, so she walked over and patiently explained, "This is a new species of cat grass, snake grass. Don't worry about it biting, it's essentially a plant." Of course, Dake wasn't afraid, he was just a little surprised. "Since there's snake grass, don't tell me." "Of course." The clerk lifted her curly hair that drooped down to her eyelids and chuckled. "The batch that just came in has a lot of animal-type cat grass. Do you want to go in and take a look? The types of cat grass are very important. If you like animals, you can leave a comment here, and I'll look into it." Begging for votes, recommendation votes, monthly votes. Originally, I didn't want to ask for monthly votes, but I suddenly realized that I'm already in 11th place in the monthly votes list. If I get one more place, I'll get a monthly vote award. Heartsuit, heartsuit, heartsuit. Chapter 50. He walked into the shop assistant's secret room. Dake opened his eyes and was dumbfounded. What kind of designer improved the catnip grass? The entire room was filled with dozens of pots of catnip grass. All kinds of catnip grass were drowsy under the influence of special spices. Among them, the most eye-catching one was a gigantic goldfish grass. The scene of a fat goldfish with white scales and red fins growing on the grass was like a nightmare. If the catnip grass was a creation of paradise, then the goldfish was a creation of the devil. Around the goldfish, there were other kinds of catnip grass, skunk grass, hedgehog grass, earthworm grass, eel grass, pigeon grass, abalone grass, mouse grass, octopus grass, spider grass, scorpion grass, lizard grass, and a bunch of other new catnip grass. Seeing that Dake was so shocked that he couldn't speak, the shop assistant asked, "What do you think? Is there a breed that you like?" Dake raised his hand and pressed his chin back. After a while he said, "That goldfish is not bad." "Really?" The shop assistant was pleasantly surprised. "I think it's really good too." Those dull and lifeless fish eyes, the fish mouth that never closes, and the feeling that it's slightly fatter than normal goldfish. Wow, it's so cute. Dake. Ha. The shop assistant was still talking non-stop. Actually, this batch of new breeds was improved by someone we hired. It's still in the testing stage. The main thing is to see how the response is. If the response is good, Dake interrupted, I'm looking forward to your finished product. Why don't we go look at the cat? The shop assistant's tone became sluggish. I also have a yuba. After returning to the shop outside, Dake continued to pick catnip grass. In the end, he picked an American shorthair kitten from a bunch of catnip grass. Dake didn't have a preference for cat breeds. He liked all of them. Rather than saying that he had chosen this little kitten, it would be more accurate to say that the little kitten had bitten his finger in its mouth. The way the kitten used its two paws to grab his hand and sucked hard on his finger captured Dake's heart. Rage -1. The effect was immediate. The hidden danger of fury that had accumulated in his heart seemed to have been alleviated a little because of its appearance. If he were to describe his face in a comic book, his cheeks would definitely be round. The price of cat grass was not considered expensive. A pot only cost 50 credits, while a small bottle of cat juice cost 1 credit. It could be used for 2 to 3 weeks. Dake paid the credits without hesitation and planned to bring the catty plant and the catty plant back to the dorm. When he passed by Forest Cafe, he subconsciously glanced inside and suddenly saw AI Ma arguing with a senior. Both of them were holding the same book in their hands, and their expressions were serious to the point of anger. However, judging from the expressions of the other senior sisters around him, they didn't seem to care. Instead, they nodded their heads repeatedly. Is this a tea party for women? Dake smacked his lips, feeling that this place was truly a demon's den. So he left without looking back. It was already 3 o'clock in the afternoon when they returned to the dormitory. He placed the catty plant on the wide balcony and tied the string that extended from the pot to the railing according to the shop assistant's instructions to secure the pot. This way, the catty plant wouldn't run around. When it got used to the environment here, it probably wouldn't be possible to drive it out even if he wanted to. Then, Dake used some special spices that he bought from the shop assistant and sprinkled a few on top of the catty plant's head. It then entered a sleepy state. After doing all this, Dake moved the most important catty plant to the desk and compared it with the description in the book, carefully observing and recording it. After confirming his thoughts, he took out the magic brain dropper and the thinking bottle and prepared to transfer the 2 drops of pride stored in the thinking bottle to one of the branches of the catty plant. The whole process took 10 minutes. There was a small hole at the front of the branch that looked like a worm's mouth. It could be opened by injecting a little magic power, and it would close when the magic power dissipated. There was also a layer of liquid membrane inside that could lock the thought substance inside. After being injected with the thought substance, the branch would harden and show a strange, heavy state, drooping down like a ripe fruit. Once it drooped to a certain angle, it meant that there was no more space inside. Dake determined that the branch should be able to store 1 more drop of pride, so he used the dragonfly skimming the water technique to absorb the overflowing bit of pride and injected it. In this way there were 3 drops inside. Dake's pride index, including the 1 point that had quietly increased this week, had 104 points left. In general, he now had pretty good control over the various values of the 7 deadly sins and could be considered to have entered a good state of gradual growth. The next step of his plan was to try to make a magic card with 10 points of pride injected. He planned to make it next month, which was after Halloween. The 3 drops of pride in front of him, as well as the 2 drops that would be absorbed, would be stored until the beginning of the next month. During this time, he had to take good care of the catty plant. He also had to master more and more comprehensive knowledge of making magic cards. In addition, the plan to collect flower cards also needed to be put on the agenda. He looked at his remaining credits and decided to make another trip to Traveler Street. Of course, first of all, he had to move the catty plant to the balcony to bask in the sun. Dake had only inquired about flower cards from Deanna and Luo C, so his knowledge was very limited. However, he roughly knew that this kind of thing was currently being circulated in 2 ways. One of the ways was through gifting. Someone would insert a flower card into a student's dormitory door and send it out. Dake had previously received a White Devil's Snare flower card. At first, he thought that this was a method similar to handing out flyers, but later he realized that not everyone could receive this gift. It was clear that the other party was targeting people. The other way through which flower cards were being circulated was through Travelers Street. It seemed that someone had sold a large number of flower cards to some shops on Travelers Street, and those shops would give the flower cards as gifts to students who came to shop. However, not everyone would give them away. Dake currently knew that the only shop that would give out flower cards was the Quirky Candy Shop. Therefore, he decided to go to the candy shop to take a look. Even if he couldn't find out anything, it would be good to get one more card. When he came to Travelers Street again, Dake's vision had widened a lot because he didn't have a strong sense of purpose. He also saw many details that he hadn't noticed before. The biggest treasure hunting ground on Travelers Street didn't seem to be those shops, but the stalls everywhere. The upperclassmen who set up stalls on both sides of the street really sold everything. He even saw a kind of semi-finished magic card that was almost cheating, with a completion rate of 90% and above. The Academy had stipulated that everyone could only use the magic card that they made themselves. However, there were policies from above and countermeasures from below. The Academy's rules were dead, but people were alive. As he walked, Dake suddenly noticed that there was an upperclassman selling a replacement card. Guess where did Dake make a mistake in this chapter? Looking for recommendation tickets, Heartsuit monthly tickets. Chapter 51. The replacement series of magic cards was extremely popular in Shang Malian Academy. Students always hoped to immediately take off their old school uniforms and change into their favorite clothes after entering Travelers Street. There was no changing room at the entrance of Travelers Street. If they didn't have a replacement card, they would need to borrow space from a clothing store. They would also need to bring a complete set of clothes, which was neither convenient nor beautiful. However, the clothing stores on Travelers Street would only provide the latest trendy clothes and would not provide replacement cards. Therefore, if students wanted to get a replacement card, they could only buy it from the stalls set up by senior students, apart from making it themselves. However, because the production of a replacement card was very complicated, it didn't earn many credits, so there weren't many people selling it. Dake stopped to look curiously and found that the replacement cards sold by this stall were all green, Halloween-themed models. When it came to Halloween, people would naturally associate it with pumpkins, candy, ghosts, and masquerade balls. On the eve of Shang Malian's Halloween, there would be an unprecedented masquerade ball that would turn the entire castle into a stage. If one could catch a hidden ghost at the masquerade ball, they could even exchange it for credits as a reward. The first website was https://m Vipkanchu. VIP. Those who caught the most ghosts would even get a special title. As Halloween gradually approached, some experienced senior students were already rubbing their hands together. Dake would occasionally hear them mention it in the common room. As for the first-year students, Halloween was a rare opportunity to earn a lot of credits. In short, when that day came, no one would wear a school uniform again. Of course, Dake didn't want to be the only exception. Since he happened to come across it, he wanted to choose a replacement card to use since it wasn't expensive anyway. He glanced at the three prices of 33 credits, 66 credits, and 88 credits. Dake didn't pay much attention to it. He squatted down and looked carefully for a while. Since it was a Halloween-themed model, most of the replacement cards here had extremely high body coverage. Of course, there were also the succubi models that were off the charts, but those were the minority. Most of them were the Vampire series, the Knight series, the Monster series, and the Palace series. Although there were quite a few others, there was no uniformity. First year, aristocratic house? The senior student who set up the stall asked casually. Dake nodded and said politely, "Hello, senior." The senior student laughed happily. "Although I'm from the House of Fools, I'm still your senior. My name is Leon. If your classmates also need to change their cards, they can find me in the common room of the House of Fools." Dake asked curiously, "Is there no access control in the common lounge of the House of Fools?" Leon explained, "Of course, but our miss is very hospitable. As long as you bring a gift, a small bottle of lubricant, she will open the door for you." Dake said in surprise, "Lube? Ahem." Leon averted his gaze and said awkwardly, "Anyway, that's what happened. Since you're a new student of the Aristocrat Academy, I recommend you this vampire set. This was the most popular set in the Aristocrat Academy in the past. I also injected sweet blood into the fangs. As long as you infuse magic, blood will flow out. That's really good." Dake lowered his gaze and looked through the vampire set. He found that it was the traditional red and black color scheme. It looked good, but he felt that something was missing. He asked casually, "Is there a Demon King set?" Leon's expression froze. "There is a hero set. By the way, I remember a student who called himself the Hero's Son came this year. Is he in your academy?" Dake said, "Knight Academy." "A knight?" Leon said emotionally. "I really hope he can wear my Masquerade Knight set." Dake suddenly thought of something. "Masquerade Knight set?" "Yes," Leon said proudly. "He was a very famous hero when the demons were still alive. He used a special belt. As long as you insert a card into the belt, you can transform into a Masquerade Knight. It's very similar to today's Holy Armor series magic cards. Do you know the Valkyrie Yalvet? She is one of the holders of the 12 golden holy armors." Of course, Dake knew the Valkyrie. He had also seen her complain that the holy armor was too tight. The so-called holy armor was very similar to the holy garment. The 12 golden holy armors were designed according to the 12 constellations. They could increase the user's strength and speed by hundreds of times. The Valkyrie who wore the holy armor was the real Valkyrie. Dake couldn't help but become interested in the Masquerade Knight set. But the more he looked, the more he felt that something was wrong. Why did the Masquerade Knight set here look like a Beelzebub set? Forget it, I'll just go with something more ordinary." This kind of full-body set really affected his mobility. If he was going to do something big on Halloween, it was better to choose a lighter set. For example, this night dress mask set was very good. Black dress, white glasses, crimson cloak, white gloves, and a blood-red rose. And it only cost 33 credits. "I'll take this one." Dake didn't care too much. If it didn't work out, he could just change it. Lion wasn't unhappy that he chose the cheapest replacement card. Instead, he patiently explained how to engrave the final array on the replacement card. Dake expressed that he had learned a lot. These 33 credits were worth it. But before he left, Lion suddenly called out to him, "All right, I'll give you a love divination card. Enjoy your youth." Dake held the love divination card given by Lion, his thoughts a little chaotic. Lion seems quite honest, and he's also a student of the House of Fools. He doesn't seem like someone who would lie. Then, could it be that these love divination cards were really given out by Professor Ka-Zayer? Professor Ka-Zayer does have exquisite magical engineering skills, but does he have such taste? Dake carefully looked at the beautiful flower card in his hand. He couldn't imagine that Professor Ka-Zayer, who was of goblin descent, could make something like this. And according to Lion, Professor Ka-Zayer just gave them the flower cards and asked them to give them to the people they liked. There weren't many flower cards, and this was Lion's last flower card. Dake couldn't think of any common factors between himself and Anna. He walked around the strange candy shop and bought some toffee. He really got another flower card. Then, he went to the flower shop, the jewelry shop, the clothing shop. Some shops gave him a flower card, while others gave him none. After walking around, he got a total of 8 flower cards, including the one given by Lion. Plus the one he already had, there were 9 flower cards in total. 9 flower cards. It's quite a harvest. Dake left Traveler's Street before the sun set in the west. When he walked out of the pavilion in the middle of the lake, he happened to pass by White and Luo Boat. The 2 children seemed to have lost their previous estrangement and started to play together again. Speaking of which, have they finished their homework? Dake was confused. "That's why I'm here." Chapter 52. He didn't know if White and Luo Boat had gone to the library or if they had finished their homework in the library. Dake was only slightly puzzled, but he didn't intend to delve into it. With 9 flower cards in hand, he had more control over Bliss. However, if these flower cards were really made by Professor Ka Zayer, he wanted to understand and master the method of making them. On one hand, it was to have a stable source of flower cards. On the other hand, he was very curious as to why these flower cards could absorb Bliss. However, if he were to ask Professor Ka Zayer, it would be too abrupt. Dake thought for a moment and quickly remembered that he still had a thinking bottle that he hadn't returned. Therefore, he quickened his pace and prepared to go back to the dormitory to take out the thinking bottle. The common lounge on Friday night was usually the most lively time. The students vented the learning pressure that had accumulated throughout the week and didn't have to worry about homework and class time. After all, it was only Friday, and homework could be left for tomorrow. The class time was also something that needed to be considered the day after tomorrow. Remember the website, VIP. VIP. Even the common lounge of the aristocrat compound was no exception. Dake walked through the crowd, avoided Anna's gaze, and successfully entered the dormitory. The dormitory was very quiet, and there was no difference from before he left. He closed the door, turned on the light, and walked to the desk. The thinking bottle was in the drawer of the desk, so he took it and left. However, as soon as he started, he suddenly heard a meow in his ear. He couldn't help but turn and walk to the balcony. Is the cat grass awake? He opened the door and looked down at the cat grass on the balcony. Then there was silence. On the balcony, the cat grass was using 2 meatballs to grab the hanging insect branch, and its pink and tender little tongue licked the head of the insect branch back and forth. The insect branch that was supposed to be very hard after 3 drops of pride had returned to its soft appearance. Fury +1. He didn't expect to earn it back in the afternoon and return it in the evening. Meow. The cat grass didn't notice that its owner was angry and out of control. It put down the insect branch and trotted toward Dake. The tail of the cat grass was long enough for it to reach Dake's feet. Dake squatted down and put it on his lap. He was wondering if he should squeeze the juice or rub the meat tonight. Suddenly, he noticed that there was a faint mark on the cat grass's forehead. The coat of arms of arrogance? Dake frowned, and the anger in his heart quickly subsided. After checking it over and over again, he confirmed that it was indeed the emblem of pride. But what was surprising was that the cat grass didn't display the same pride as the little fiend and Ivan. Is it because it's a plant? Dake was deep in thought as he allowed the cat grass to suck on his finger. Speaking of which, how does the cat grass exist? Dake's eyes flickered as he took out Pride Eye from his card pack. Magical summoning. A dark golden ball of light flew out from Pride Eye and entered the top of the cat grass's head. But that magical card, which could make people arrogant, still didn't have any effect. Let's go to the library and check it out. Dake took a deep breath and put down the cat grass. Then, he moved the worm tree into the room. Once bitten, twice shy. Tomorrow, he would go to Traveler's Street to buy a fence to separate the worm tree and get some fur balls to relieve the cat grass's boredom. Dake sat down to take notes and found himself busy again. Should I go to the library first or find the professor first? Let's go to the professor. It's not too late to go to the library at night. Professor Ka Zayer wasn't in the office. Dake went to the lab. As expected, he saw Professor Ka Zayer making magic cards in the lab. But he wasn't making Jack Pumpkin today. Instead, he was making Mummy with bandages and mannequins. Dake thought about how to lead the conversation in a more natural manner. He opened the door and took out the White Devil's snare card. Dimming. Do you want to borrow the lab? The key to the lab next door is in the second drawer of the office. Professor Ka Zayer looked very serious. Dake didn't put the thinking bottle on the lab table until he walked over. He said, Professor, I'm here to return something. The thinking bottle? Professor Ka Zayer looked back and smiled. You can use it for a while. Dake. No, Professor. I already bought a worm tree. He wanted to talk about emotions and thoughts first before moving on to the love divination card. But when Professor Zayer saw the flower card in his hand, he didn't even think about it. He said, "Why, you're also interested in this flower card?" Dake frowned and said, "Yes, Professor. I've been thinking, does the divination of this flower card involve peeking at the thought level?" Professor Zayer was slightly taken aback. Then, he smiled even more happily. He put down the work in his hand, took off his experimental gloves, and smiled. "I didn't expect your research on the thought level to have reached this point." Then, he turned back to the lab table and stretched out his hand. Just as Dake was on high alert, he pulled out a flower card from the card bag on the shelf. The flower card was decorated with green roses. Pure and simple green roses, with the blessing of eternal youth, looking forward to the everlasting love. Professor Zayer's eyes flashed with gentleness. "Although this is just a small trick, there's something I can't see through. But as long as the magic power is interrupted, it can be separated. It's not harmful." When Dake walked out of the lab, he had already given up on probing Professor Zayer. Although he couldn't be sure, he felt that Professor Zayer couldn't be the one who really made the flower card. But Senior Leon didn't seem to be lying. In fact, he didn't have to. So, someone pretended to be a professor to win people's trust? Dake thought of the disguise card. If the disguise card was designed to look like a human, could one pretend to be anyone? This was both a hypothesis and an inference. Maybe I can study the disguise card. Panduola was playing with her cat grass on the counter. It was a fat chinchilla. It was a chinchilla, not a chinchilla. She used a silence card around the chinchilla to ensure that the chinchilla's cry wouldn't disturb the students in the library. Dake felt that her behavior was abrupt. She had never brought the chinchilla to the library before. Is it a bait? While thinking, Dake's fingers unconsciously scratched the chinchilla's chin. There was a scale on the chinchilla's chin. It was soft and warm, and didn't hurt at all. Did you buy the chinchilla? Panduola squinted. Dake, I bought a short-haired cat. Collecting the title of Halloween, the one who catches the most ghosts. Heartsuit looking for recommendation votes. Looking for monthly votes. Heartsuit. Chapter 53. She sacrificed a little bit of her looks. Dake learned from Panduola about the location of books related to catnip grass and quickly found a book called Mimicry in the Plant World in the library. There were relatively few people in the library on a Friday night. Dake poured himself a cup of unscented black tea and carefully flipped through the book. Mimicry refers to the mimicry of a creature's form, behavior, and other characteristics of another creature, thereby benefiting one or both of them. It is a special behavior of creatures that evolved over a long period of time. The biological phenomenon of catnip grass originates from mimicry. A typical mimicry system consists of a mimicry, a simulated object, and a deceived person. Take catnip grass as an example. The mimicry is the catnip grass itself. The simulated object is a cat. And the deceived person is a human. The 6 major organs of a plant: root, stem, leaf, flower, fruit, and seed. Divide the catnip grass according to its plant structure. The part buried in the soil is the root. The tail is the stem. And the hair all over its body is leaf? Dake was dumbfounded when he read this. According to his initial imagination, he originally thought that the cat part of the catnip grass should belong to the fruit. But now it seemed that this was not the case. The cat hair was the leaf. Its body, limbs, and head were the same as the main body of a cactus, the fleshy stem. As for the flower and fruit, every spring and autumn, beautiful flowers would grow on the top of the catnip grass. When the petals withered, it would bear fruit. As for the seed, it was naturally in the fruit. Dake continued to flip through the books and gradually gained a more detailed understanding of the ecology of the catnip grass. When it was about to bloom, most of the nutrients in its body would be transported to the top of its head, which would then produce flower buds, flower buds, flower buds, flower buds, and finally flowers, pollination, and fruit. This is a very important process. Dake drew the whole process into a graph in his notebook and then drew a circle on the top of the catnip grass. He was convinced that he had found the reason. In order to prove his theory, he flipped through a lot of information until 9 p.m. Then, he borrowed another book called The Costume Changer and left the library. Panduola wasn't always in the library. Most of the time, Bella was on duty. After Dake returned to the dorm, he turned on the lights, put the borrowed book on the table, and then walked to the balcony. Meow. The catnip grass walked over with its short little legs. Dake squatted down and scratched its chin, while his other hand carefully touched the pride emblem on its head. Sure enough, there was a small bud in the middle of the emblem. Feeling the protrusion against his fingertips, Doc suddenly felt a little excited. What kind of fruit would the catnip grass bear fruit with pride? Speaking of fruits, there are countless magic potions made from various fruits. Even some magic elven cards require special fruits as the core material. Before it bears fruit, I might be able to research the related magic potions or the creation of magic elves. Because he was looking forward to the catnip grass, he felt the joy of catching a cat again. The fury that had accumulated in his heart had also dissipated a little. After a while, he took the catnip grass to the bathroom and washed it. Then, he put it on the bedside table. After reading The Costume Changer for a while, he fell asleep. But Friday night didn't end. Anna and Luo C were still messing around in the common room. After the tea party, Ai Ma was invited to the reading club of the Sorcerer Academy. Tonight, she stayed up all night. After Panduola calmed down, she was preparing for the magic duel tomorrow. White and Luo Boat, on the other hand, had fun for half the night before returning to the dorm. But not long after returning to the dorm, White quietly opened the door, took a look at Luo Boat's room, and slipped out of the Night Academy's tower. Walking into the silent castle, White couldn't help but recall what happened in the afternoon. Ai Ma's last ripple was too painful. It almost made him make the wrong decision. Fortunately, Luo Boat offered to study in the library, which gave him hope. Think about your parents who passed away. Although White had never met his parents, he grew up listening to stories about the hero. The hero had always been someone he looked forward to. When he learned from Principal Arti that he was the hero's son, he was ecstatic. But now, looking back at what he had done in the past month, he wanted to find a hole in the ground and bury himself. When he first entered the library, he really did think so. He also set a small goal for himself, to surpass Dake Dimeng before the end of the semester. But 2 hours later, the difficult arithmetic homework had worn away his willpower. After exchanging glances with Luo Boat, the two brothers reached an agreement: work and rest. Yes. They also learned from Dake's teachings. The sound of his footsteps echoed in the corridor. White took out Taboo Love and injected a little magic power. The pink mist drilled out of the card and gradually gathered into a vague human figure. He didn't forget his small goal, to surpass Dake. And to achieve this, the conventional method was no longer feasible. He had to find another way. Following the pink mist's guidance, White once again came to the small temple that he had visited last night. The group of tinkers, who were clamoring to start a holy war, were not here. He carefully looked around, and after confirming that no one was hiding in a corner like he had last night, he came to stand in front of the statue. The skin of the statue became more delicate, and the white face emitted a soft halo, as if it could open its eyes at any time. White took out the chapters of the old days that he had borrowed from Luo Boat in the afternoon and carefully looked at the face of the statue. The chapters of the old days recorded the gods who ruled the worlds in the past. They existed at least 5 eras ago. They came from the starry sky. They walked in the abyss. They were once great. They once ruled the worlds. They had long been forgotten by history. They were the rulers of the old days buried in the dust of ancient times. Half an hour later, White's eyes were filled with joy. He found a god with a similar face to the statue. She was born in the moon and descended on the earth. She was both the goddess of the moon and the mother goddess of the earth. She specialized in the reproduction of all things and was not stingy with the grace of the earth. She was the most beautiful goddess, the master of the night. Her beauty was eternal. She was sacred and noble. She was in charge of fertility, and love. The old dominators in this article were taken literally. The scope was very general, and there were a lot of original parts. It did not only refer to the gods in the Cthulhu mythos. Everything was based on the setting of this book. Hotsuit recommendation votes. Hotsuit monthly votes. Hotsuit. Chapter 54. The scattered moonlight illuminated the dark night, and the Shangmalian was full of mottled shadows. At the top of the spiral clock tower in the center of the castle, Professor Didi Makesy Wei floated in the air, gently flapping her wings like a butterfly. There were deep wrinkles on her forehead, and 2 incomplete moons were reflected in her eyes. Time was like a knife, it shouldn't be stained. With a trace of red light, the sky was torn open, and warmth seeped in. Dake watered the insect tree with magic medicine, fed the cat grass with cat juice, and finished the breakfast brought by the little demon beast. He then left the tower and went to Travelers Street. The autumn morning was a little cold, and there were few people on Travelers Street. Dake bought a fence and some cat toys. After thinking about it, he bought a set of experiment tools according to the specifications of the laboratory. Ordinary experiment tools weren't expensive, but the parts that were expensive were the ones that were processed, such as the mercury glass rod used by Professor Thompson in class. Website: https://m. Vipkanchu. Vipin edition. He bought 10 10-credit blank magic conduction cards, 2 50-credit blank magic conduction cards, and some commonly used basic materials. In short, there was a huge pile of bottles and cans. The credits were decreasing at a speed visible to the naked eye, and finally there were only about 200 credits left. It's not a good idea to always borrow the laboratory, I have to have my own set. Dake nodded with satisfaction and carried the big and small bags back to the dormitory. It was only 9 o'clock. Fortunately, the dormitory was spacious enough to plan a small corner for the experiment, and there was more than enough space. Then he took out the replacement card he bought yesterday from the card bag and put it on the table. According to Lion's explanation, all he needed to do was engrave the last miniature array in the bottom right corner of the card, and it would be activated. The replacement card was actually a type of item card, a variant of the Armor series. It completely gave up on attack and defense, and only focused on the style and design. At most, it added a size change function. The Cayman Knight replacement card made by Lion was just a simple imitation. Intuitively speaking, it was a cosplay costume. Dake quickly completed the last step and tried it on. How to say it? It was convenient, but the workmanship was actually quite rough. In particular, this evening dress was no different from an ordinary evening dress. Since it was for Halloween, he might as well buy a high-end set himself. No, if my mother knows that I'm wearing such cheap clothes, she'll cry, right? Therefore, Dake tossed the replacement card into the drawer and decided to disassemble it when he wanted to study it. Then, Dake picked one of the 9 flower cards and prepared to do an experiment. The purpose of the experiment was very simple. It was to further verify the previous conjecture. The phenomenon caused by a flower card alone was not enough to prove that they could all absorb bliss. Therefore, at the very least, multiple experiments were needed to verify this. Moreover, he also wanted to see if he could control the frequency of magic input so that the flower card wouldn't mutate or be damaged after absorbing bliss. It was mainly White's forbidden love that inspired him. Since White could transform flower cards into magic cards, so could he. Bliss, 92. Yes, 2 points more than the end of last month. After the index for major sins exceeded 100 points, it would become slightly more difficult to increase, which gave him more margin. Dake didn't care about the extra 2 points. Instead, he carefully observed the flower card on the table. The exquisite flower plate was adorned with gorgeous red plum blossoms. They were proud and unyielding, gorgeous and enchanting. But what kind of evil was hidden under this gorgeous appearance? He was ready. Once again, He used the magic pen as a medium and tapped on the flower card, guiding magic bit by bit. The red plum blossoms bloomed from the flower card, releasing a fresh fragrance. With the continuous input of magic, they gradually dispersed, and an excessively fair and delicate face appeared on the card. The heart-shaped scale under the corner of the eye always made the face that belonged to the pure type become unusually coquettish. Dake held his breath and quickly changed his mind. The face of Panduola suddenly dispersed, and the cute catnip grass reappeared. Meow! The catnip grass squatting on the bedside table meowed at the right time. Quiet! The little fiend on the bird's stand raised its claws at the catnip grass. A trace of arrogance appeared in its eyes as it looked down at the catnip grass that was bound by the flower pot, and constantly drew a sense of superiority from it. Dake was still concentrating on adjusting the output of magic. With the continuous input of magic, the red plum blossoms on the flower card suddenly changed. Dake instantly stopped the input and moved the magic pen away. The red plum blossoms trembled violently for a long time before stopping. Dake then tapped the magic pen again and tried to input a little more magic. Bliss -1. With just this little input of magic, the flower card broke through a certain threshold. The red plum blossoms that had just quieted down instantly went berserk. The bright red petals broke away from the calyx and turned into a whirlwind as they drilled out of the card. Dake immediately withdrew. The little fiend, who had been ready for a long time, only flapped its wings and shot out a thick syringe. While breaking the storm of petals, it nailed the red plum flower card to the table. Dake did not give up on the experiment because of this. He used a sealed bag to put away the remains of the red plum flower card and picked a new flower card. The garden full of spring can't be contained. A branch of red apricot blossoms out of the wall. The white apricot blossoms with a hint of pink were shy and cute, with a hint of temptation. He picked up the magic pen again and input magic. Although he had to be more careful this time, the amount of magic that the flower card could withstand was still at a critical point. Looking at the trembling apricot blossoms in the flower card, Dake thought for a long time and continued to input a little more magic. Bliss -1. The moment the system prompt floated in his vision, he immediately stopped the magic. However, there was still a change in this apricot flower card. The apricot blossoms on the card began to disintegrate into extremely thin threads from the edges of the petals. However, these pink threads did not turn into vines and snakes like the black rose's threads and rush out to bite people. They were like woven clothes, wrapped round and round on the flower card neatly and neatly. When the last gap of the flower card was covered by the threads, they quickly melted and only dyed the flower card a faint pink. Dake looked at the flower card that had turned completely pink with a strange gaze and signaled the little fiend to grab it to take a look. The arrogance in the little fiend's eyes retreated. It immediately flew down from the bird rack and poked the flower card with its claws. With this poke, a trace of dense air climbed up its claws. One of its legs left the ground and spun around on the spot. As if it was drunk, its face was flushed red and it fell down with a plop. Please recommend me, Red Heart. Chapter 55. Looking at the blushing little magical beast, Doc couldn't help but wipe away the cold sweat on his forehead. That was close. It's great to have little magical beast. Dake quickly took out his notebook to record the effect. This flower card had obviously undergone a qualitative change, and based on the flower card's own strength, the effect should be more obvious than Pride Eye. For now, I'll record it as Bliss Eye. From the looks of it, it's at least the ultimate version of the Happy card. Just a trace of the mist is enough to make little magical beast fall into bliss and unable to extricate itself. But why was the apricot flower card successful, but the red plum flower card failed? Is it because of the different colors? That's a bit too idealistic. Dake wrote in his notebook, perhaps apricot flower is more compatible with bliss. Remember the URL, Vipkanchu. 6. In order to prove this conclusion, he needed to do more experiments. But before that, he had to thoroughly study Bliss Eye. Dake took out Magical Beast, Ibu, from his card bag and summoned little Ibu. Squeak! Ibu tilted its head and looked at him. Dake couldn't bear to see it like this, but he still hardened his heart and gave the order. Ibu, whose intelligence had reached 2.5, couldn't help but show a hint of sadness, but it still jumped onto the table and pressed its paw on the pink flower card. A trace of mist leaked out from the flower card. Ibu squinted its eyes, its cheeks flushed, and its body swayed slightly. But it didn't faint from joy like little magical beast. After 2 more pats, there was no more mist coming from the flower card. Dake concluded that it was only the mist that leaked out when it was refined. So he first touched it with his magic pen, then touched it with his own hands, and finally held the flower card in his hand. A few minutes later, the little magical beast slowly woke up, but when it raised its head with difficulty, it saw that lowly Ibu lying softly in its master's arms, licking its master's fingers. Then, it saw the pink card in its master's other hand. It closed its eyes and lay down like a corpse. Magical summoning. Dake activated Bliss Eye for the first time. In an instant, a layer of faint light appeared on Bliss Eye. Pink petals suddenly swarmed out, but it was no longer the shape of an apricot flower, but a completely unfamiliar flower of bliss. The petals turned into a thin mist after coming into contact with the air. Following the instructions of the magic power, they pounced on the little demon beast that was pretending to be dead. Wow! The little fiendish beast screamed and was surrounded by the pink fog. Then, a small demonic beast appeared on top of Dark's head, panting for breath. After that, he experimented with Ibu paste and finally got the results. Bliss Eye was much stronger than Pride Eye, but not as strong as Pride 2. The duration was around 15 minutes, longer than Pride Eye, and the cooldown was even shorter, only 30 minutes. Based on his initial estimation, this Bliss Eye should have reached the limit of 1 drop of great sin. In addition, after Ibu-chan returned to normal, her intelligence had increased to 3.0. The little fiendish beast, on the other hand, had no way of judging. Dake recorded all the data with satisfaction. He also paused the experiment. In the afternoon, he used the magic brain dropper to absorb another drop of pride. He tried to put the tip of the dropper next to the catgrass mouth, but the catgrass didn't seem to be interested in the dropper and refused to suck. Dake didn't want to waste it, so he injected the drop of pride back into the worm branch. Unexpectedly, the catgrass seemed to have smelled something fishy and pounced on it with a meow meow sound. Then, the buds on its head began to grow at a speed visible to the naked eye. Dake observed and recorded at the same time. He was very happy. 17 minutes after the catgrass absorbed the drop of pride, the bud on its head stopped growing, but it had already grown into a small bud. In the afternoon of the weekend, Dake absorbed another drop of pride and injected it into the worm branch. As usual, the catgrass used its 2 meatballs to lie on the worm branch's head and sucked hard. The bud on its head grew bigger and bigger. Gradually, it grew to the point where it was about to bloom. Dake recorded the data excitedly. At this rate, it should be able to bloom with 1 more drop. 2 more drops and it might bear fruit. But after recording, he suddenly realized that he had used up all the pride he could draw this month. He suddenly became depressed. Meow. Meow meow meow. In the blink of an eye, it was Monday morning. After resting for 2.5 days, the little magisters once again immersed themselves in their busy study routine. In the first summoning class, Professor Shi Erfu finally began to teach one of the advanced summoning techniques, sacrificial summoning. The sacrificial summoning technique was a special summoning technique based on the extremely long summoning time of 4-star and above magic elves. Magic elven cards were divided according to star level. The first 3 stars were the first step, 4-star to 6-star were the second step, 7-star to 9-star were the third step, and 9-star and above were the fourth step. With each step, the summoning time and cooldown would increase by 1 level. The summoning time of the first 3 stars could be reduced to 3 seconds. To the 4th star, it would take at least 1 minute. To the 7th star, it would take at least 30 minutes. To the 9th star and above, it would take at least 3 hours. Some magic elves would even need a few days and nights, or even a few months of continuous casting before they could be summoned. In the early days of magical engineering, Even if the magisters had high-level magic elven cards, it was very difficult to summon them in a direct battle. Every time a high-level magic elven card was summoned, a large number of people would be needed to protect it. It wasn't until about 30 years ago that a special summoning technique came out of nowhere. Magisters sacrificed low-level magic spirits to summon high-level magic spirits, successfully shortening the summoning time. However, every sacrifice would cause irreparable damage to the low-level magic elf card. It was only in modern times that this technique was innovated. It no longer caused damage to low-level magic elven cards and further shortened the summoning time. It was officially named the sacrificial summoning technique. The core of the sacrificial summoning technique was the accumulation of star levels. Plus equals 4 all plus 4 all equals 4 all 4 all 4 all plus 4 all plus 4 all 4 all 4 all equals 4 all 4 all 4 all. It had nothing to do with the number of cards, it was purely the accumulation of star levels. The necessary criteria was that in order to summon a third-tier magic elven card, there had to be at least a second-tier magic elven card among the sacrifices, and so on. Professor Shi Erfu gave a demonstration in class. He used a total of 15 seconds to summon a 6-star magic elven card, which shocked the little magisters. The sacrificial summoning technique and the normal summoning technique shared a cooldown. The shortest casting time and cooldown time were both 3 seconds. It was also at this time that Dake realized that his 8-second summoning time was far from enough. Don't be arrogant, don't be impatient. Just as he was skillfully taking a break, he suddenly noticed that something was wrong with White, who was also sitting in the last row. Is he holding a card and shining it at someone? Please recommend meal. Chapter 56. Without debt to worry about, White seemed to have lost his soul. Although he said he wanted to change, finishing his homework was the best he could do. In this world, there was nothing more delicious than the magic chess. If there was one, it would be the taboo love in his hand. White carefully aimed the card at the students in the front row. After 3 nights of continuous prayer, he finally received a revelation from the goddess. A drop of divine water fell from the sky, leveling up taboo love. As long as forbidden love was aimed at a person's head, the card would display the person's portrait and some of their attributes. Name, rarity, favorability. 1 second to remember. https://m Vipkanchu. VIP. Although White didn't discover any other uses, it was already interesting enough, wasn't it? White, what are you doing? Luo Boat whispered. White aimed forbidden love at Luo Boat and said proudly, a new toy. Name, Luo Boat Broheim, rarity, R, favorability, 80. White put forbidden love on the table. Look, Luo Boat, your rarity is R. Your favorability is 80. Luo Boat was confused. I know about the rarity, but what does it mean? And the favorability? White, I don't know what it means either, but most people are N. You're special, Luo Boat. Really? Luo Boat laughed. Then the favorability, White whispered. Maybe it's because most of their favorability is below 50. Luo Boat, you really are my best friend. Luo Boat smiled confidently. He was especially confident about this. What about AI Ma? Have you tried taking pictures of AI Ma? White shook his head. It's too far, and there's someone in the middle. AI Ma was sitting in the first row, so of course he couldn't take pictures. But White quickly thought of someone else. He couldn't help but look at the last row by the window. Luo Boat noticed his gaze and became interested. Want to try? White nodded. Help me keep an eye on Professor Shi Erfu. I'll try. Dake looked over and met his eyes. White quickly put down forbidden love and pretended to whisper to Luo Boat. After Dark turned his head away from them, Victor opened forbidden love and took a look at it. Name, Dake Dimming, rarity, R. Affection, 45. White side, 45. I didn't expect Dake's affection to be higher than most people's. Luo Boat, your parents are the twin swords of the kingdom. Maybe he wants to be friends with you? White. After a moment of silence, White suddenly noticed a golden symbol on the upper right corner of the card. He touched it, and a line of words appeared, 80 affection, unlocked. Ding ding ding. The summoning class came to an end with Professor Shi Erfu's scolding. Luo Boat, who was caught with his points deducted at the last minute, lowered his head. Dake glanced over, put his books in his bag, and prepared to go to the next class. It was said that after the Fantasy Beast class, Professor Kaiser would teach the students how to make magic elven cards that had a wide range of applications. Dake was very interested in this. And it seemed that most of the first-year students were interested as well. After all, to join the dueling club, one had to have 20 magic elven cards. If they could learn how to make magic elven cards, they would be able to get a full set of 20 magic elven cards in a relatively short time. Everyone loves duels. Dake couldn't help but quicken his pace. But halfway from the summoning class to the magic theory class, he suddenly noticed that someone was following him. Dake didn't reveal his intentions. He only walked a few steps after turning a corner, then turned around and waited. Then he saw White and Luo Boat suddenly bump into him. He dodged to the side. Luo Boat stopped in time, but White lost his footing and bumped into the wall. Ouch, it hurts just looking at it. Dake took the initiative to ask, "Why are you following me?" Haha. Luo Boat shrugged and laughed dryly. After a while, White rubbed his head and forced himself to say, "It's like this. Aren't our parents comrades? I just suddenly remembered that we haven't officially greeted each other even though we've been in school for more than a month." Dake frowned slightly, and a trace of vigilance flashed in his eyes. White's action was too sudden. If White had come to make friends with him when he first entered the school, Dake might have believed it. But as White said, they had been in school for more than a month. In more than a month, how many times had he entered the same classroom? Why didn't he come earlier or later, but now? Then he thought about White's strange behavior in class. Dake's mind turned, but he maintained his aristocratic demeanor and smiled. "Now we've greeted each other. I'm Dake Dimming, it's nice to meet you." White was inexplicably excited and quickly reached out to shake his hand. "White Gouda, it's nice to meet you too." "Really?" Dake smiled reservedly. "I'm going to the classroom to prepare now, we can talk later." White, "Okay." After Dake left, Luo Boat nudged White's arm and whispered, "How was it? How did it feel to shake hands with a genius?" "You don't say, it was pretty good," White said humorously. Then he picked up the taboo love that he had secretly taken a picture of, and his expression suddenly changed. Name, Dake Dimming, rarity, UR, favorability. 44. White was surprised. What's going on? Why did his favorability decrease instead of increasing? Luo Boat leaned over to take a closer look and hesitated. Is it because we disturbed him? Or did we make him angry by tailing him? White was distressed. Is that so? But we just wanted to say hello to him. Luo Boat, how about we give him a gift for Halloween? Receiving a gift will increase his favorability, right? White, that's a good idea, but what does he like? How about a toffee apple? Luo Boat shrugged. Maybe a set of magic chess would be good too. White, that's true, everyone likes magic chess. Luo Boat, also, when are we going to take a picture of AI Ma? White was puzzled. Wait, Luo Boat, why do you care so much about AI Ma? AI Ma was mentioned in class. Luo Boat froze, then realized. No way, White. You don't think I'm a masochist, do you? I just want to see how low her favorability is for you. Don't you want to know? White opened his arms and shook his head fiercely. No, I don't want to know at all. Luo Boat. You do. White. Okay, I do. Begging for recommendation votes. 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 Chapter 57. Around the Corner. Dake Dimming didn't really leave. As soon as he left White and Luo Boat's field of vision, he stopped to listen. White and Luo Boat didn't lower their volume, so Dake clearly heard their conversation. I see, that flower card has a new function, it can spy on people's favorability. Wait, isn't this a feature of the main character of a dating game? It's presented in this way? So, he just wanted to increase my favorability. Is there some kind of reward? Or unlocking cinematics? Ha ha ha, it shouldn't be unlocking cinematics. Although it doesn't seem to be useful, I can't let him spy on my brain. In Harry Potter, there is a brain seal technique that can seal the brain to resist secret techniques such as mind capture. When practiced to a high level, one can even simulate false memories. There's no way this world doesn't have it. Dake continued to listen for a while. When he saw more people on the road, he quickly left. https://m Vipkanchu. VIP, the next class is Professor Ka Zayer's class. If the flower card making really has nothing to do with Professor Ka Zayer, maybe I can get some information from White. When Dake arrived at the magic introduction classroom, AI Ma Métis was already sitting in the front row. He smiled and sat in the last row by the window, waiting for White and Luo Boat to arrive. Based on White and Luo Boat's behavior, he had a guess. Even if White could obtain benefits by increasing favorability, it could only be from special people. For example, the main characters in the game. Come to think of it, Emma should be one of them. As expected, 5 or 6 minutes before class, Victor and Robert walked into the classroom through the front door, which was a rare occurrence. White purposely held the taboo love card in his hand. Even though he pretended to be casual, it was obvious that he used the card on AI Ma. White and Luo Boat then hurried to the other side of the last row. The two didn't have time to put down their backpacks as they looked at the card together. Name, AI Ma Metis Rarity, SSR Favorability, 31. Luo Boat was surprised, 31, White, it's the same as most people. It seems like AI Ma doesn't hate you as much as she seems. I want to know how much her favorability is towards me, maybe she doesn't hate me as much. White looked at him and smiled awkwardly, haha. However, he soon noticed that there was a lock on the surface of the card. Although it wasn't a golden lock like Dark's, it was still orange. He immediately stretched out his hand and touched it. Suddenly, a line of words appeared at the bottom. 80 favorability, unlocked. Is it because of the rarity? White immediately noticed the key. Dake's rarity is UR, so it's a gold lock. AI Ma's rarity is SSR, so it's an orange lock. Even though I don't know which one is rarer, there's no doubt it's related to the rarity. Robert also realized the crux of the matter, and his expression turned slightly ugly. So there's no lock on my cards because... White quickly comforted him. Don't worry too much, Luo Boat. Let's look at other people, like Professor Ka Zayer. Luo Boat's eyes lit up. Even AI Ma and Dake have locks, so the professors must have locks too. White whispered, be gentle, we'll think of something when the professors come. My rarity is UR, and AI Ma's is SSR? Dake raised his pen and wrote a line of levels. N, R, SR, SSR, UR. It's probably this type of level. It's closer to rarity than rarity. If 80 favorability unlocks a reward, then there should be a further reward unlocking condition. For example, 90 favorability and 100 favorability. As expected of a world derived from a dating game, it has all the elements. But favorability in the real world isn't as easy to raise as in the game. No, I didn't eat all of the melon from the last one. I have to eat more of this one. Even now, Dake still felt slightly happy when he thought about the melon he ate on Friday. That really relieved a lot of the fury that had accumulated in his heart. White Gouda, maybe it's a good happy fruit. Professor Ka Zayer arrived at the classroom half a minute late. There was still a white bandage on his head. This made White and Luo Boat's plan to block him at the door completely fail. They could only hope that Professor Ka Zayer would walk off the podium himself. But Professor Ka Zayer wouldn't walk off the podium unless he gave out homework. The footstool on the podium explained the reason. In this class, Professor Ka Zayer talked about the general method of making magic elf cards, and recommended a book called Magic Elf Card Creation, General Handbook, to the students. Most of the students listened very seriously. Dake was also very serious. This knowledge was very important for a magister, and there was a limit to what one could learn just by reading a textbook. Professor Kaiser mainly taught a kind of basic alchemy method, which gathered several alchemy circles and ended with alchemy circle number 1. As long as some materials such as potions, plant organs, teeth, hair, eyeballs, blood, and so on were thrown into the alchemy circle, the alchemy could begin. It was just that this creation method was very random. Before the creation, no one knew what the final product would be. Dake preferred to call it the random creation method. In comparison, in the Magic Elf Card Creation General Handbook that Professor Ka Zayer mentioned, there was a detailed, basic creation method. In that book, the creation method of Magic Elf cards was broken down according to race and attribute. In total, there were 15 races, 20 attributes, and 300 different basic creation methods. Very good, that's exactly what I need. Dake wrote down the name of the book and prepared to borrow it after class. After Professor Ka Zayer finished this part, he gave the students some time to copy the notes on the board. Then he walked off the podium to see if the students were taking notes seriously. When he walked to Dake's side, he looked at the dense but neat notes, nodded slightly, and turned to the other side of the classroom. White and Luo Boat were on the other side. The two pretended to be taking notes. When the professor turned the corner and walked forward with his back facing them, White knew his chance had come. He immediately picked up Forbidden Love and pointed it at Professor Ka Zayer. The next moment, boom! Taboo Love suddenly exploded with a pink mist, causing the card to tremble violently. White was shocked and quickly pressed down on the card. But Professor Ka Zayer had already turned his head and stared at him with a deep frown. P.S. If you want a reward, will it still work after it's published? 7:31. The book has too many words, so it's hard to update before it's published. If it doesn't work, pretend I didn't ask. PS2. Please recommend me. Chapter 58. Deduct 50 points from White Gouda. Come to my office after class. Professor Ka Zayer's calm voice was mixed with anger. Everyone in the classroom couldn't help but stop writing. The sound of the pen rubbing against the paper disappeared in an instant. The entire classroom quieted down. Under such an atmosphere, White raised her head. Her face was pale and the corner of her mouth twitched. Humph. Professor Ka Zayer took one last look at the Taboo Love and continued to walk forward. Keep copying. This was probably the first time he was angry since school started. As the most popular professor in the first year, Professor Ka Zayer was always kind and amiable. His teaching style was also very interesting and not boring at all. Remember the website, Vipkanshu. 6. This made the students think that the hero's son must have made an unbearable mistake. The Knight Institute students looked at him with a trace of pity. The Noble Institute students looked at him with ridicule and schadenfreude. Even Dake's mouth was half open. He didn't know whether to sympathize or laugh. Rage -1. In short, his anger subsided a lot. Dake turned his attention back to the notebook. As for this matter, he didn't need to think to know that White must have used the Taboo Love card to take a picture of the back of Professor Ka Zayer's head. Was the back of a professor's head that easy to take a picture of? Professor Kazel was the only surviving legendary-level great alchemist from Merlin's era. Even though he had become an archmage, it had only broadened his horizons and made him even more powerful. White actually used a card to peek into the thoughts of a magister of this level. Was he looking for death? Fortunately, Professor Ka Zayer had a good temper. If it was Professor Cheong Si with the giant bloodline, he would have slapped him. TSK. Cheap hands. After Doc finished copying the book on the blackboard, he intentionally or unintentionally glanced over. White looked very nervous, but she still carefully copied the blackboard with Luo Boat. Time passed by slowly. Finally, it was time to end the class. Professor Ka Zayer glanced at White, packed up his teaching materials, and walked out of the classroom. White couldn't help but lower her head and tidy up her textbook. Luo Boat couldn't help but ask, "What should we do?" White complained, "What else can we do? Go to the office." Luo Boat racked his brains and finally thought of something to comfort her. "Relax, White. Didn't the professor deduct 50 points from you? There shouldn't be any other punishments." "Punishment of other natures?" White jerked her head up. "You won't fire me, will you?" When he thought of this, Werther was abnormally terrified. As for his credits being deducted into the negatives, that was not a big deal at all. He received the Shang Malian Academy admission letter in the orphanage, and then the principal brought him to the academy. If he was expelled, he would have nowhere to go. Shang Malian Academy was his only home. No matter how Luo Boat comforted her, White didn't listen. He walked to Professor Ka Zayer's office and knocked on the door. "Come in." White turned the door handle and opened a crack. He carefully peeked inside. However, the first thing he saw was not an angry Professor Ka Zayer. Instead, it was Dake Dimeng leaning on the sofa and sipping black tea. Dake saw White poking his head out and gave him a friendly smile. Then, he pointed at the door with his teacup. When Victor realized this, he hurried into the office and closed the door behind him. Then, he finally saw Professor Ka Zayer sitting behind the desk. Professor Ka Zayer's expression was calm. He wasn't as angry as he had imagined. In addition, Dirk, a student of the same grade, was there. This made Werner less nervous. He lowered his head and took a few steps forward. He came to the front of the desk and said, "Professor Duong." Werther shuddered violently. Dake put the teacup back on the coffee table. Of course, Dake couldn't teleport. However, White walked too slowly, which allowed him to get to the office first. Because it was a problem caused by the flower cards, Dake easily cut in. However, White arrived before he and Ka Zayer could talk much. Thus, he sat down and started eating. Oh no, drinking tea. He was familiar with this office anyway. Professor Ka Zayer raised his head and tapped the desk with his fingertips. "Show me the magic card." Although White was reluctant, he still handed over Taboo Love, under the threat of Professor Ka Zayer. Professor Ka Zayer took the card and frowned. "A flower card? You turned this flower card into a magic card?" White bit the bullet and said, "Yes, Professor." Professor Ka Zayer took out a magic card from the drawer and swiped it on the desk. Suddenly, a cubic barrier surrounded Taboo Love. Then, he raised the magic pen and pointed at Taboo Love. The magic power gathered into a beam and poured into Taboo Love through the barrier. White watched nervously. Dake also opened his eyes wide in curiosity. However, after Taboo Love came into contact with Professor Ka Zayer's magic power, it only trembled and a thin mist rose. Professor Ka Zayer frowned. "You've already bound it to you on a deeper level." Then, he raised his head and looked at White. "What do you want to say?" White gritted his teeth and didn't say anything. Professor Ka Zayer continued, "According to the rules of the academy, even we professors don't have the right to pry into student secrets, especially those related to the making of magic cards. However, if you're willing to, well, it seems like you're not willing." Professor Ka Zayer waved his hand and removed the barrier. Then, he pushed Taboo Love back to White and said seriously, "I remember I said this when school started. There's no good or evil magic card, but there's a difference between good and evil users. Prying into other people's thoughts without their consent is a big taboo. I only deducted 50 points because it's your first offense. I hope you can take care of yourself." When White took back Taboo Love, his back was already wet with sweat. Under Professor Ka Zayer's gaze, he reluctantly summoned up his courage and said, "Professor, I'll remember your teachings." When White walked out of the office, Luo Boat quickly leaned on him. White closed the door and leaned on Luo Boat's body. Talking to Professor Ka Zayer felt like there was a layer of invisible pressure that repeatedly crushed his willpower. There was only one thought in his mind now, and that was to never do it again. P.S. Update tomorrow's chapter after 12 o'clock in the evening and post a higher reward for it. It's better than a heart. So don't keep today's recommendation ticket. Chapter 59. After White left, Dake said to Professor Ka-Zar, "Professor, did you find anything?" Professor Ka-Zar shook his head. The magic card crafting technology has been developed to this day and is very mature. Even if you disassemble it violently, it's difficult to see through its essence. This is also why many magisters can sell new magic cards with peace of mind. Dake couldn't help but feel a little regretful after hearing this. But at the same time, he also understood something. It was because of the anti-theft technology of the magic card that people were diligently researching and constantly forging ahead, which allowed the rapid development of magic engineering technology. Professor Ka-Zar continued, "However, I felt a very ancient aura from that flower card. It's very likely that it involves some power that I'm not familiar with. But since White Gouda is the son of the hero, he must have a gift from the hero. It's normal that I can't see through it." Dake's brain turned and he said the real purpose of his visit. "So, Professor, how can we prevent this kind of magic card from peeping into one's mind?" Professor Ka-Zar picked up the magic pen and spun it in a circle. He smiled again. "Dimming. It's not easy." Dake smiled and said, "That's why I came to ask you, Professor." Professor Ka-Zar waved his hand. "Come here." Dake stood up and walked behind the desk, facing Professor Ka-Zar. 1 second to remember https://m. Vipkanchu. VIP. The professor looked him up and down and said, "You are very talented, but sometimes it's not good to rush into success. Any magic engineering technology that involves the brain is very dangerous because human research on the brain is still at the level of experience. But if you really want to learn, I can teach you a kind of spiritual magic." Dake. Spiritual magic? Professor Ka-Zar nodded. "Yes. Now that magic engineering technology is widespread, ancient magic has been gradually forgotten in the dust of history. However, what we have to understand is that it doesn't necessarily mean that a technology that has been eliminated is not necessarily bad." Dake said, "That's true. Just like history, we can always draw inspiration from the past." Professor Ka-Zar was quite pleased. He said, "You don't have any foundation in magic. Let's not talk about the overly complicated mental spells for now. I have a spell here that can resist the invasion of your mind by concentrating your mental power. Do you want to learn?" Dake naturally nodded in agreement. The magic that Ka-Zar taught was really very basic. It was called nether magic. It was said that it was a technique that mental sorcerers in the past used to condense mental power. After mastering this technology, he wouldn't be able to constantly defend himself against mind invasions like Professor Ka-Zar. However, as long as he used this technology in advance, he would be able to temporarily defend himself. However, this technique was not easy to master. It required time and effort to learn it bit by bit. After Professor Ka-Zar taught him the method of learning, he said, "I can help you experience the state of the underworld god when you use the underworld god technique." Dake knew that this was an opportunity and immediately asked seriously, "What do I need to do?" Professor Ka-Zar nodded in satisfaction. "Just close your eyes." Dake immediately closed his eyes. Professor Ka-Zar raised his hand. Light gathered on his fingertips, and he suddenly pointed between Dake's eyebrows. The light then spread out, rippling as if it were breathing. Dake suddenly felt that his brain was completely empty. There was nothing existed, except for an extremely small black spot in the middle. Once he focused his attention on this black spot, it was as if his entire soul was attracted to it. "Ah!" He suddenly screamed and opened his eyes. The professor asked concernedly, "How is it?" Dake said, "I feel that my entire mind is focused on this spot. There are no other thoughts." The professor said in satisfaction, "Yes, this is the state of the underworld god. Remember this feeling. It will help you grasp the underworld god technique faster." Dake immediately nodded in agreement. In fact, Lu Zhou's gains were much more than Professor Katzer had imagined. After experiencing it once, he immediately realized that this was also a technique that could assist in emotional control. This is much more effective than chanting the Prajna Paramitha Sutra. Even though it couldn't prevent sudden emotional outbursts, it could prevent continuous emotional outbursts. For example, when he was angry, he could use the underworld god technique to forcibly suppress the rising anger. As long as he dealt with it in time, he could prevent rage +1 from happening. There wouldn't be any more rage +2, rage +3, or rage +10. Professor, Dake suddenly said. Professor Ka Zayer looked over. Yes. Dake thought carefully and said, Actually, I specifically went to Traveler's Street yesterday to ask the senior who gave me the flower cards about where they came from. Professor Ka Zayer immediately became interested. Who made them? Normal students can't make such delicate props. Dake thought for a moment and said, The senior said that you gave them to me. Professor Ka Zayer showed an obvious puzzled expression. I gave them to you? Wait, someone pretended to be me? Then these flower cards probably hide something that I don't know about. Let me see. Dake didn't expect Professor Ka Zayer to be so quick-witted. With just one sentence, he realized the problem. Professor Ka Zayer quickly took out his flower card from his card bag. The flower card decorated with green roses emitted a faint glow under the light. The professor stretched out his hand and pressed it. The green roses floated out, and a slightly young and beautiful face appeared on the card. Dake just happened to see it and realized that it was a little fairy with butterfly wings. He didn't think much of it and just thought that it was Professor Ka Zayer's old flame. Professor Ka Zayer took out his tools and was about to violently dismantle the flower card, but he hesitated. After a while, he put down his tools and said, That's it for now. I'll discuss this with the other professors in the afternoon. Don't worry, leave it to us. Maybe this is just a prank? Dake replied, I hope so. Then he sensed the atmosphere and left the office. On the way to the cafeteria, Dake thought about Professor Ka Zayer's various reactions. He was sure that Professor Ka Zayer couldn't be the creator of the flower cards. But he seemed to be hiding some secrets? And what role did White, who had forbidden love, play in this? Dake gradually became interested. However, he knew what it meant to only dabble in it. Too much exposure to this kind of thing could lead to emotional instability. Perhaps it was a better choice to be a heartless spectator. After he finished lunch, it was already 1 o'clock in the afternoon. He didn't forget to go to the library and borrow the Magical Elf Creation General Manual. Fortunately, it wasn't fully borrowed. Please recommend me. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.